When you think about the wonder of life on Earth, it's easy to focus on big, flashy displays of muscle, flesh, and bone that can blow you away with their power and size. Yet there's so much more going on here than what you can see from the grandstands. I'm talking about the hidden array of microscopic machinery that keeps that bull jumping and the cowboys hanging on for dear life. Yep, molecules and cells are the real stars of this rodeo and of everything else in the living world. Let's take a closer look. A human body contains trillions of individual cells, and the largest, on average, are about 2/1000ths of an inch wide. After entering a skin cell, we discover that it's filled with molecular machines, crucial to the survival of all life on Earth. The genetic instructions needed to build these remarkable mechanisms are stored here, in the nucleus, the command center of the cell. Inside, we find 46 flexible strands of chromatin, each made of proteins and the macromolecule DNA. Every rung in this molecular ladder is part of the blueprint required to construct and repair the cells, tissues, and organs in a human body. The color of your eyes, the ligaments in your toes, your strong and flexible skeletal system, the magnificent circuitry in your brain. Every biological detail of who you are is spelled out in the genetic code of your DNA. If we could remove, uncoil, and align end to end each double helix molecule locked within the chromatin fibers of a cell nucleus, we discover more than 6 linear feet of DNA. Packing that much genetic material into a nucleus that's more than 140,000 times smaller than the head of a pin would be like trying to stuff 24 miles of thread into a single tennis ball. But how is that degree of miniaturization possible in a container so impossibly small? The answer is revealed in a spectacular feat of molecular engineering. First, proteins called histones attach themselves to the long DNA strands. Then, like the line on a fishing reel, every DNA molecule is wound and spooled tightly again and again until it is compacted at least 10,000 times from its fully extended length. These condensed coils ultimately form chromatin strands that fill most of the nucleus. The biological systems that empower our remarkable physical abilities are truly extraordinary. And as a finale to this brief excursion into the molecular world, let's calculate the amount of DNA that's packed so efficiently into our bodies. Using conservative estimates, we'll multiply 6 feet of DNA per cell times 3 trillion nucleated cells, each with a full supply of genetic code. That's 18 trillion feet, or nearly 3.5 billion miles of DNA stored and processed in the cells of just one human being. Now, a huge number like that requires some context, so think about it this way. Our sun is approximately 93 million miles from Earth. So if we have 3 billion miles of DNA compressed within our cells, then we each possess enough of the living code to stretch from Earth to the sun and back again more than 18 times. The engineering necessary to organize and package our DNA is just one of countless biological marvels that make life possible.
It seems like it doesn't.
For every cell in our bodies depends upon an extensive network of complex molecular machines working together in precise harmony. Most of these mechanisms are too small to be studied without the aid of powerful technologies. Yet each bears the clear imprint of purpose, foresight, and a designer of incomparable vision and skill. The implications are obvious. As human beings, we are more than the accidental convergence of time, blind chemistry, and undirected natural processes. Much more.
Hello.
Hi, Joel.
Good evening.
How are you doing today?
Very good. Been enjoying a cup of coffee and just kind of snacking, watching videos. I watched that one you
Yeah.
just showed a little while earlier today. It was really nice.
I don't know, did it stop to show propaganda or so? I don't think it went through
Propaganda.
the whole video. Or did it? Yeah, just 6 minutes. So, so it has
It seemed
gone
like
through already.
I thought it went through the video. It seemed like it started a different video at the end of it, but it seemed fine.
Yes, the last piece was a different video. But I have written about the condensation of the chromosome.
I'm curious what you mean by condensation. When I think of that, I normally think of liquid.
Here, chromosome condensation and compaction is nothing short than awe-inspiring, amazing evidence and of setup by supreme intelligence.
I got you. Compression. Okay, is what I would.
Yeah, compression or condensation, whatever.
Okay.
Imagine trying to stuff about 10,000 miles of spaghetti inside a basketball. Then, if that was not difficult enough, attempt to find a unique 1-inch segment of pasta from the middle of this mess, or try to duplicate, untangle, and separate individual strings to opposite ends. This simple analogy illustrates some of the daunting tasks associated with the transcription, repair, and replication of the nearly 2 meters of DNA that is packaged into the confines of a tiny eukaryotic nucleus. Solution to each of these problems lies in the assembly of the eukaryotic genome into chromatin, a structural polymer that not only solves the basic packaging problem, but also provides a dynamic platform that controls all DNA-mediated processes within the nucleus.
Right. Remember how the last time we spoke, I was talking about how in information science and information technology, we're busy trying to reverse engineer a lot of the technologies that we're discovering, such as this, in the language of God and DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a prime example of that. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with information technology or with internet type protocols or Ethernet computer information transfer technology. One of the major things that we use is compression, decompression, of what's called codec protocols.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this is something, this, we spend a lot of time and money and effort of trying to constantly improve our codex, and this is the most efficient known in the universe. And so this is part of that example of how those of us in these fields and actually doing the science are trying to understand how to recreate, or at least reverse engineer, how God does it, so that we can try to do something similar. It's that amazing.
I have no knowledge because I'm not an information engineer like you are, but I think WinZip is a prime example which compacts the information. Now, you could make a fantastic analogy or a syllogism based on that thing, and you can put as the premise. I don't know how you formulate that, because I don't know what is how you guys as information engineer do package the information in computer science, but you can put in computer science that way we compact information, we WinZip it or whatever, and we can compact it, I don't know, 1,000 times, 2,000 times, something like that. And analogously, in the nucleus and in chromosomes, we can pack the information ratio to 1,000 in interface chromosomes and about 7,000 in the mitotic chromosomes. That is 7,000 times more compact inside of the nucleus when meiosis into mitosis takes place. So how do you get to that by evolution?
Yeah, again, it's very difficult to do it intelligently with human knowledge and technology. So yeah, it's not possible to do it naturally.
What is the compaction rate that is currently the top compaction rate? What is the best that humans are able to compact information for computers?
The current best ratios, well, and you also have to ask if you're in human technology, you have what's called either a lossy compression ratio or a lossless, which basically means if you're going to lose information, if you're going to try to use a mathematical equation to basically have an acceptable amount of loss of information to help compress it. So for a lossless, though, that does not allow any loss of information. You're trying to maintain the purity of the original code, original information. What's called WinRAR or 7-zip is probably one of the more popular, and because you can actually adjust the compression ratios with zip or with these other compression technologies. And when you do so, though, again, these different algorithms are applied. You have to decide between speed versus the compressibility. So the more compressed your information is, the longer it takes for the math basically to uncompress it, versus if you want something to be more quickly decompressed, you don't compress it as well. And so I think the best is about 80% with the WinRAR.
So you need, in one way or the other, you need to make a compromise.
Yes, constantly. That's part of the game. It's a balance.
So we can compress information about 80 times. Is that correct?
Well, about 80%. So it's like 0.8.
80%. That means information that you take 100%, you can compress it to 80% in order to not lose information. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
You just can reduce the space 20%. That's all?
Right. If you've got a gigabit or gigabyte file, you might be able to compress about 800 megabytes out of it. Reduce it to around 250 megabytes. It's about the max.
Without losing information.
Right.
And in the nucleus, the size is reduced to 7,000 times.
Yeah. That's not natural. If we could do that, it would just revolutionize information technology around the world.
So, have you studied what science papers say about it? How that could be done through evolutionary transitions?
I'm not. I've studied how it does it now. Basically, how we see the histone coils and the the fractal wrapping that the DNA does. I've read papers on how DNA is compressed and decompressed as it is, but I have no idea how evolutionists assume it happens on its own, or how it did it before, does it now.
And of course, we can presume that if we investigate how they explain it, they will come up with a lot of probably, and it must be, we suppose, and we can imagine, with that sort of language.
Well, that's just it. I mean, if you do know, I would love to learn more, because if there is some sort of quote unquote natural process that we could learn from to better improve our ratio, which is less than 100%, then yeah, I mean, I just that would yeah. Oh gosh, I wouldn't understand. That'd make a lot of money. Let's put it that way. If there's a way to mimic how they're saying it, it's been done naturally.
Do you know if there are any kind of, I don't know, I think Microsoft is working with attempting to mimic DNA.
Well, I don't know about Microsoft specifically. I've worked on projects where we've been essentially reverse engineering the 4-bit programming language of DNA, and it's very difficult, and it's not something compatible with our current computer information technology. But what is Microsoft doing that you're thinking?
No, I just hear there are some companies that are trying to mimic the information storage in DNA, but I have no closer knowledge. I've not read about it.
Yeah, again, the projects I've worked on was where we hope to try to at least pretend someday soon to reverse engineer that, to be able to apply it far into the future. As of right now, we have no clue. We know how it's done. We have no clue how to mimic it without, again, we're using base 2 type computers, but binary computer systems. DNA is 4-bit. So that by itself is an order of magnitude more complex. And so, Star Trek has all kinds of really cool theories with quad-based computers, and the new, like IBM's new quantum computers have a 4-bit state type system, but they're not true computers. They're more like an archive machine, so to say. But so yeah, no, it's an entirely different, it's a radically different paradigm of computing technology. We're nowhere close. We would like to, but it's leaps and bounds forward of technology, DNA compared to human technology.
I mean, what astounds me is that when we demonstrate that kind of molecular technology of the highest ingenuity and complexity, and we cannot even come close to mimic what we see here, and people still keep believing that mindless processes and evolution cannot come up with that kind of stuff. I mean,
it's wishful thinking at best. Yeah, I agree.
I mean, we have to put the nucleus and the histones and chromosome compaction straight to the origin of eukaryotic cells, because all eukaryotic cells, as far as I know, they have all this.
Right. Yeah, that's part of that's what I try to explain. That's the most convincing argument for the design, the hand of God in life. It's not the complexity, it's the uniformity, the universality. Every cell, bacteria, every microbe, every plant, every animal are all compressed and decompressed and use the same universal information code set everywhere. There's no randomness to it at all.
So even prokaryotes, they also compress the DNA?
Yes, from my understanding, all DNA is exactly the same function. The only differences that I've read about are some transcription methods. For a while there was the assumption that the horizontal gene sequence transfers within bacteria was unique to bacteria, for example. But then we started seeing that in even human DNA and others. So even what did once assumed to be special translocation technology features are themselves universal.
I did make a live video in 2018 about the histone code on the histone tail, and that is just fantastic epigenetic information, which is like a barcode stored on the tail of each histone protein,
Mhm.
and there are machines which write on these histone tails, and there are other machines, molecular proteins, which read the information and they communicate with each other, and all this is orchestrated to make the gene expression.
Correct. Right. It's information on top of information on top of information. My understanding, the histone protein, the wrapping, the fractal wrapping shape of the DNA strand, that's one layer of information. The epigenetic markers are entirely different. That's even more complex, a variable, dynamic form of information storage. And then there's all kinds of transposons and all kinds of what I've described. You heard me the other day describe them as literal artificial intelligence technology. There is cognitive functions. There are things in DNA that traverse up and down the entire collection of all the chromosomes that actively work with minds of their own to control and regulate and maintain this computer, this living computer.
This is amazing.
It's beyond amazing. We're still barely just understanding it.
Yeah. And what is even more remarkable is that this is all pre-programmed information
Yes.
in order to work 100% autonomously. There is no outside agency which is involved in this. So it works 100% without the outside intervention.
Yeah. Honestly, I would say that appears to be true, but that's an assumption. As far as we know, we don't. God might be actively, that might be the cognitive feature of this. Artificial intelligence, especially cognizant AI, seems to be able to think for itself, but it really doesn't. It's still just a collection of heuristics, of do's and don'ts, essentially. And so, yeah, it's mind blowing for sure. It's a whole nother field of science, really. We have information science, we have genetics or genomics, we have these technologies, but what we're starting to observe is this cognizant or immersive thinking processes within the regulatory aspects of DNA that I think that deserves a new name, a new field of science to begin to understand.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I cannot imagine that God is constantly intervening in these information exchange processes. What I think is that God preloaded or pre-programmed all these epigenetic languages and the information in these systems. I think we have still no understanding where most of these epigenetic languages and codes are stored. I mean, we know that there is information stored in the histone tail, in the Glycan code, and maybe some other. But I've listed 24 different epigenetic code systems, and I did not find out where this information is stored. And I mean, we know that there are bioelectric codes which work through signaling in neurons, but what directs these codes and how these codes are stored, I don't know. And I think science is not even at the beginning to unravel it. Like the spliceosome code, the splicing code. We have 20,000 genes, and each gene can be spliced in 300 different ways. And we have 20,000 genes and 6 million different protein species. And that diversity is promoted through splicing, through the spliceosome. And when I was in Seattle last year, I had a talk with Sternberg, and I asked him, and he said science is not even at the beginning, has no clue where the information is stored in order for the spliceosome to know where it has to splice the introns or exons in order to have a useful product. But it seems that there are signals coming from the outside, so there is some gene regulation and signaling which makes an interpretation of the environment, of the information coming from the outside, and let's suppose it's cold or it's hot, then that information is transmitted through signaling to the gene regulatory network, and then the spliceosome also is informed and knows, oh, it's cold, so we need to express a protein which is better adapted to cold weather, or it's hot,
Mhm.
and
Or any environmental change, correct? Right.
and of course this is a whole dynamic system, and it had of course to be fully pre-programmed in order to work autonomously. And
It seems to be that way, correct. And I was going to also add, so even the retrotransposons, we do see where the code is to basically create those structures to be able to for them to be present and be activated and certainly be copied into the next cell. But once they're created, once they've detached themselves from the DNA and RNA transcription processes, the code for them to know what they do, again, the cognizant part of it, the self-thinking part of the regulation part of these types of structures, that's not in the code. So, it would be nice to assume they just randomly do everything correct, but things don't ever randomly do things. Certainly not AI. AI, especially in human AI development, the more randomality, the more you let it do its own thing, the faster it self-destructs. It's really difficult to keep AI on track. The very stringent rules and different things. But so how it does it? I mean, we know how it's made. We know how they're constructed. We know where the chemicals come from, how the building blocks are made. But we don't know how it works on its own, how it does these things. And then as far as epigenetic markers go, that's a whole nother field. There's genetics, and then there's epigenetics, which is outside of genetics. From my understanding, there's an entirely different level of science, a field of science dedicated just to that study. It's outside of biology, where they're trying to understand and study how things from not just temperature, like you mentioned, but aspects of daily life, like how you sleep, the people you associate with, what you watch on TV, the things that we eat, almost every little detail of just the directions and the aspects and decisions that we make in our life affects those epigenetic markers somehow. And if that's pre-programmed as well, I mean, it just seems beyond the comprehensible ability to think that could have just been that. It has to be directed. It's purpose on top of purpose with multiple folds of information, which is just the exact opposite of random.
Yes, that is precisely why genetic information alone is not an explanation for biological form, because there is cell memory, which, as you said right now, it stores its own history, and that is then transmitted to the next generation, and that is not inherited by genetics. That's epigenetic, or I don't know, even something else which is involved in that.
Yeah. It's again, there's too much. What little we think we know is already beyond certainly human intelligence, but it's beyond any intelligence that we could imagine. So, and of course, the more that we learn, the more fantastically intelligent it obviously is. Well, I think we're still scratching the surface. That's why I say we need a whole different paradigm of science to begin to understand this stuff. To even hope we can
interesting that when I read papers about signaling, then what they outline is eventually the interaction of proteins and enzymes, how the signaling pathway goes from the external environment eventually to the membrane proteins and goes inside and then goes to the nucleus, and there it directs the expression and so forth. But what you never see is these papers giving any explanation whatsoever in regards of the code itself, what it is, how it is expressed, the language. Science is simply silent on that in regards of that matter.
Right. We're still learning it. We're still trying to reverse engineer and understand it. Yeah, no, the parts external to the nucleus, as I described, that's a whole nother ball game. That's a factory by itself. That's a whole nother. Again, biology seems useless now for biology. I often talk about. I've had microbiologists tell me literally that they can't do their job without having to get some sort of software engineering background.
Yeah, that means that information becomes more and more important in order to understand softwares and so forth.
Yeah.
Here I list 24 different epigenetic codes.
Okay. See, I don't think I've seen different types of epigenetic codes before. This is interesting.
Here, these are
What-
the ones
Yeah.
which I have investigated so far.
Metabolic codes. What are these describing? Can you summarize?
I have each of these described later on here.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a lot of them, though. I'm curious if there's like a quick summary.
Yes, I have a paper on that.
And again, I'll be honest. The what I have tried to study of epigenetics, it's a whole other ball game. That's a science. That's a field of science by itself alone. That is not genetics.
Yes, of course.
So
It goes far beyond. Even if we look the glycan code, it is far more complex than genetic information, and science is just on the surface, to scratch the surface to explain that language, how the structure of the glycans attached to protein, how they are providing information to the neighboring cells, and upon these then interact one with each other.
Yeah, when you say science can't touch that, see that's overwhelming to me. I'm an advanced AI coder. I'm an information guy. You know, I love this stuff. This is the stuff I love to do for a living. I get paid to do this kind of stuff.
Yes.
And sorry for my wife, by the way, she's talking to their friends in the background. I'm doing a good enough job just trying to understand just the physical code, just the 4-bit, codec information transfer protocol of DNA, just the easy part of it, the part that mimics our technology. We want to mimic our technology with. That's difficult enough for me. This other stuff here, this would take lifetimes, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and I mean, that, for example, the brain and neurons, they have now a bioelectric code, and it directs the cells to their place in the organism, but nobody knows the language itself, and the spiking in the neurons, how that is interpreted by the cell machinery in order to direct the cells, each one to its place. I mean, if you think that we have 3 billion nucleotides, but we have 37 trillion cells, and each of those cells has to be directed to the place where it belongs. So, of course, just by the number, you can figure out that the genetic information is far from being enough to provide that information.
Well, again, it's an assumption. From my understanding, the epigenetic side of it, it's outside of genetics. It's outside of the actual hard-coded DNA. So it's a way that external factors, I often attribute how, like the Bible, for example, biblical science, as I call it, confirms this by talking about how the sins of the father can pass to future generations. Well, that's epigenetics. So I understand how it affects gene expression, but how the DNA itself, the genome, understands not only what to accept, how to accept it, where these genetic markers are allowed to attach and to affect these gene expressions without just completely destroying the entire show. That's a whole nother mind-blowing, I don't even know how to describe it.
Yeah. I have listed here 18 different things that have to be specified in regards of each single cell in the body. And you need information for each point of these. Yeah, layer of information on top of information. And then there's the duality of the information of just the hard code itself. This is the exact opposite of random. Yeah. And my limited understanding of just the raw
of just even small sections of, because again, I was trying to reverse engineer things for somehow the parts of DNA that have like an automatic built-in antiviral protection subroutine that we want to try to use for our own computers. Some of these AI algorithms. This other stuff almost, I don't want to say scares me, but it's so overwhelming as it is. I don't even want to start to try to try to learn this stuff. It's too overwhelming. It's amazing.
Yeah. And I think mainstream science, they are starting to grasp that the information goes far beyond genetic information to specify an organism. And there was a recent paper now, and they compared the genetic information like a library full of books. And then is, of course, a higher order of information, which is one of the mechanisms is the gene regulatory network, which would be like a library classification software where there is stored the information when to express the information and where to take the book out of the library and then at what time to express it. So that is what you said. It's higher order information on top of information. So you have the chromosomes, full chromosome set that could be compared to entire library. Then each gene, let's suppose the humans have 20,000 genes that could be compared to a library with 20,000 books. And then you have the gene regulatory network, which would be the library software, which would be programmed to take each of these 20,000 books out of the library at the right time, know where to find each book, and then extract the information in each book and express it and use it as a blueprint at the right time.
With it all maintaining some sort of useful, necessary state.
Yeah, and that is on top of that because it's not a static expression network. It is dynamic precisely because it adapts to the necessity. So when there is, let's say, cold weather, and we have these 20,000 books, then there is a section of, let's suppose, 100 genes which contain the instructions to make proteins, which are adapted to work in cold weather. And then you have the regulation and the gene regulatory network, which knows where that section is and where to take these books out and express only the proteins which are required for the organism to be well adapted to that weather. And that is basically adaptation, which is commonly said to be microevolution, but it's in reality adaptation. And there are as well heat shock proteins, which regulate also when proteins are misfolded or so, and they are discarded. So there is also the error check and repair mechanisms. That is all preloaded. That has to be fully operational from day one when life starts.
Correct. Yeah. It's anti-evolution. And Antangelo, this whole conversation, especially when you mention the libraries, this is reminding me of a famous quote from Albert Einstein, if you'd like to hear. Have you ever read G.S. Farrick's book called Glimpse of the Great?
No, but I know that you love Einstein.
Sir. He is one of my favorites. I'll read this to you real quick about how libraries, where, again, this is directly from Farrick's book, 1930, Albert Einstein. He says, quote, "I'm not an atheist. I don't think I can call myself a pantheist. The problem involved is too vast for our limited minds. We are in the position of a little child entering a huge library filled with books in many languages. The child knows someone must have written these books. It does not know how. It does not understand the language in which they are written. The child dimly suspects a mysterious order in the arrangement of the books, but doesn't know what it is. That, it seems to me, is the attitude of even the most intelligent human being toward God. We see the universe marvelously arranged and obeying certain laws, but only dimly understand these laws." Imagine what he would have said if he knew what we know today about DNA.
Yeah, and I was thinking precisely about Einstein these days, Joel, and I was thinking um, about the complexity of the universe, which probably is as much complex as what we see in molecular biology. But I mean, when I take a science paper of astrophysics, they start with all these kind of complex formulas, which is completely out of my understanding. So I don't go even into it because it's out of my expertise, let's say.
Hmm.
And I mean, what we see is that that kind of complexity that we see on a molecular level, um, it exists on an atomic level where there has to be precise organization and order, like the atomic structure of the nucleobases. They must be just right and the right composition and the right atoms in order to have the right hydrogen force between the two bases and what's on Crick's base pairing. And then you go to a higher level of organization, which is a little bit less macro, let's say molecules like DNA or amino acids and so forth. And then you have higher order, which is the molecular machines. And then you have higher order, which goes to cells, to organelles. Then you have a higher order, which goes to tissues. Then you have higher order, which goes to organs. And then you have higher order, which goes to organ, organ systems. And then you have higher order, which goes to organisms. Then you go to higher order, which is organism systems and societies. And then you have higher order, which goes to ecology. And then you have higher order, which goes to ecological systems like energy cycles. And then you go to higher orders, which is the entire atmosphere, then fine-tuning of the planet, then the fine-tuning of the star system and planet system, planetary system, fine-tuning of the galaxy, fine-tuning of the universe.
Oh wow!
And that's just and then atheists say, oh, there is no evidence of God's existence. I mean,
Yeah, and that's just scratching the surface. For you're reminding me of Roger Penrose, if you're familiar with him.
yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
he's an atheist, and I don't know how he can be an atheist, you know?
He's not an atheist. It's fascinating to me. People think so. But there's a famous quote of his as well from his 1985 book, From the Emperor's New Clothes, that I like to quote often, that talks about that extreme order within the universe. And I like to, because again, and I was going to mention how, you were really humble about talking about how, it's not in your expertise, but even people like myself who do enjoy multidisciplinary scientific fields, and I've worked in so many different areas, across the years. I love this stuff. I love to know as much as possible. But even guys like me, we understand the more we do know, the more we know we can't know. It's so mind-boggling.
Yeah.
I want to know, but it's not that I could probably learn a lot of it if there's any studied expertise on it. I'm sure I could figure it out and absorb it and apply it and etc. But there's a limit. There's a point where it's okay. You're going to sacrifice your time and effort in some other area to focus on one because it's just too much. Yeah, no, I like to quote Roger Penrose's conclusion of what's called his singularity theorem that touches on the high order of the universe, if you're interested.
Uh-huh.
See if I can find it real quick. It was shortly, so he gathered about 100 scientists back in the 80s around the world, and Stephen Hawking was his assistant at Cambridge for many years.
Yes. I made a video on the laws of physics, and I mentioned that there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, they put together what Penrose was working on called a singularity theorem, which was basically to try. Where's that quote at? He was trying to calculate what's called the minimum entropy rate for the universe to exist. There's a probability factor for entropy, And so they wanted to calculate just what the minimum probability rate for that was, because what he observed, the singularity theorem proves, is that the natural quantum gravity state for makes photons, makes light actually cause light to attract itself. So light will naturally, if it goes in a certain direction, if there's two photons close together, they will even though they have no mass, they will slowly gravitate towards each other on a quantum level. But the way he describes it, I don't know why people think he's an atheist. He describes it the way God, he invokes God. God had to supernaturally and temporarily, for a split nanosecond, reverse that natural quantum gravity state for photons to attract each other. He had to reverse it temporarily. That allows the universe to be expanding the way it is, which is essentially the Big Bang. And so he got a huge team of scientists together to work on it. Again, for about a decade, and this was the conclusion. He wanted, him and Stephen Hawking won a joint Wolf Prize for this in 1984, and then he went and wrote about it in a book about. It was a book that's supposed to be about artificial intelligence back in the mid 80s, called The Emperor's New Mind. And so, but he summarized this finding. He says, "Quote: This now tells how precise the creator's aim must have been, namely to an accuracy of 1 part in 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123. This is an extraordinary figure. One could not possibly even write the number down in full in the ordinary denary notation. It would be 1 followed by 10 to the power of 103 successive zeros. Even if we were to write a 0 on each separate proton and on each separate neutron in the entire universe, and we could throw in all the other particles for good measure, we should fall far short, of writing down the figure needed. That's the minimum entropy rate that God had required to allow the universe to be expanding the way that it is. It's impossible."
Yeah, and that is
but
just
here we are.
one. That's just one of the requirement of the fine tuning. What you are mentioning is the cosmological constant, and it has a relation to the expansion rate of the universe, which has to be just right. That forces of expansion in relation to the forces of gravity, and that is just one factor. And I have also an article of the Big Bang and its fine tuning, and the Big Bang is the most precisely fashioned event in the history of the universe. So if it wasn't exactly right, there would be no universe at all. And that basically kills the argument which atheists very frequently come up with, which is the puddle argument, which they say it's not the universe which is fine-tuned to life, but life is fine-tuned to the universe. But if the existence itself of the universe is fine-tuned, then this is that kills immediately that counter argument.
Well, not only that, but even Einstein's cosmological constant was derived by the universe. His postulations, his theory of relativity, was initiated by the idea that the universe itself was fine-tuned. So, whatever chicken before the egg scenario they want to try to generate from that, it's both. It's like I think you just basically hinted at. It works both ways. The universe and life are both fine-tuned to work together. That's like a wonderful quote from Einstein I would love to share. About that one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, hold on. Let me see if I can dig it up real quick. I got a huge volume of quotes like I store over the years. Yeah, this is in his public interview with the Saturday Sun. Was it the Saturday Evening News in New York? Again, interviewed by Varick. He said, "I claim credit for nothing. Everything is determined, the beginning as well as the end, by forces over which we have no control. It is determined for the insect as well as for the star, human beings, vegetables, or cosmic dust. We all dance to a mysterious tune, intoned in the distance by an invisible player." I love that. He associated God as a musician because Einstein himself was a violinist. And so everything, dust, people, everything in the universe is fine-tuned together with the universe. I love this.
Yeah. Well, I am starting to delve into quantum mechanics. I had a hard difficulty to understand the wave function collapse. And what someone explained to me recently in simple words and made me understand is that if there is no observer, then there is no wave function collapse. And if there is no wave function collapse, there is no matter, there is no physical existence. So everything that the whole universe requires fundamentally an observer. So
Well, that's part of it. And again, I was going to say, good luck. Kind of half joking with you. Quantum physics is a whole nother mind-blowing thing. And I think it was Derek. I forget who it was that said this specifically, but if you think you can understand quantum physics, that means you can't understand. But it is Einstein who said that. But yeah. If you want to know more about it, let me know.
What they say is that we cannot understand how there can be entanglement, or that the behavior of one object can dictate the behavior of another object simultaneously and at long distances. And that goes even in regards of information and photons. So they say that's crazy because we cannot understand that entanglement, how one object on long distance can influence the movement of another object.
Yeah, I know. I'd love to go open that box up too, because we understand it well enough to actually use it in our technology today. But real quick, if you don't mind, I'm going to address Gavin's point about evolutionists trying to they ignore entropy with their millions of years of time scale. That's an excellent point. And Einstein and Heisenberg and thank you, dear. What was that guy's name? Not Born. What was the other guy's name that starts with the B that started the Standard Model? Rutherford and what was the other guy's name? Sort of the B. Who's an atheist? Huh? Oh. Anyways, the other guy that Einstein used to debate with all the time, who tried to hold on to the constant universe theory, eternal universe, the idea that the universe is eternal, or even if it's very, very old, entropy, essentially everything peters out. So all of the stars, all the planets, all the people would eventually turn into one big giant, useless, invisible, cold soup.
Yes, the heat death of the universe.
Right. And it's pretty close to near perfect entropy now, that cosmic background radiation phenomenon, which, by the way, creationists theorized and discovered. It was Arno Penzias' discovery in '78. It's like at 4 microvolts or whatever it is right now. It's almost nothing now, But
so we should be close to the end and expect Jesus to come back.
Not only are we close to zero heat basically in the universe, but there's a limit to how, because the universe is still accelerating as far as best as we can tell. And there is a limit to how far things can accelerate. And today in modern cosmology, it's called the Big Rip. I don't know if you've heard of that yet. No. Where basically everything, atoms, subatomic particles, everything at the quantum level is going to be so stressed. The energy tensor limitations that, again, Einstein formulated things, are literally going to be pulled apart, where matter, energy cannot. Don't worry about entropy. Everything, or existence, quote unquote, is going to literally be torn to shreds, where quanta will not be able to spin together anymore.
So that means that the 4 fundamental forces which hold the atoms together and so forth, that situation will at one point when entropy is worn out, it will basically explode. Is that correct?
Well, no, it just literally just gets torn apart. So quanta is basically the smallest known theoretical particle. Basically, it's just a mathematical representation of things that spin. Imagine little things spinning around together. And the spinning attraction and this is all part of quantum mechanics, is based on what they call quantum orbital, let me get this right, quantum orbital angular momentum vectors. So I like to use what's called fidget spinners, if you're familiar with those. Teach this to
No,
little
but
kids.
no, but what I understand is that basically the movement of
Mhm.
the quarks inside of the neutrons and so forth,
Mhm.
that movement, which is energy, gives rise to matter.
It does. That's correct. And so quarks are actually those are macro quanta states. Yeah, gluons and all kinds of other things that build those. So,
Yeah,
but the
up
fundamental
quarks,
building block.
downs. Yeah, and
Yeah.
they need to have the right configuration. It's two ups and one down,
Yes.
and so forth, in order for there to
Oh
be
yeah.
actually
There's
atoms.
two different dozen types, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What I'm getting at
So
though, so the fundamental aspect of all of this, the quanta itself, these are spinning pieces of force. They're not really energy, but sometimes they're called energy quanta. But they're basically that's the forces that generate all of this, all of the bosons, all of the fermions, all of the quarks. All of these are just collections of different spinning states of quanta. So and the that orbital mechanical the vector, that's the force that allows these quanta to attract and repel and generate these forces that generate these subatomic particles, that generate the atomic particles, that generate everything else. So, but there's a point where things accelerate and are being pulled apart by these same forces to the point where no quanta itself will be able to stay interacting anymore. So it's beyond entropy. It's the very force, the very quantum force that allows anything to exist will itself be disconnected. The quanta will not be able to react together anymore, or they'll
I
spin anymore.
I have thought about this, Joel, and um, there are some which are not dualists but idealists, and they think that everything is just mind, and
Yes,
that everything is just held together by the mind of God,
that's
and
exactly
that
what Max Planck said, the founder of quantum physics. I
yeah.
can quote him too if you like on that. Oh, do you want me to find it?
No. I thought you had it on hand, but
No,
yeah,
no.
I know what the quote. I made a meme of these quotes of Planck and so forth. But I
Okay.
mean, when I was last year in Seattle, I asked Jay. I forgot his name. He wrote the book. Um, um, Planet. I forgot the name. It's with Gonzalez. The Privileged Planet.
Oh, I've heard of
Uh,
that.
yeah, and he had there a speech, and then I asked him at the question Q&A. I asked him the forces, the energy that is in our universe. Could we think about it as it is the energy or the force of God, of the Creator? And then he strongly denied it and said, no, the energy was created at the Big Bang. And then I was thinking to myself, and I still have no clear understanding on that. Of course, God must be powerful. He must be able to um, uh, provoke that change from non-physical to the physical. And how that happens, and some kind of energy, force, or power must be with God eternally, and His nature must be that powerful, you know.
Mhm.
And
Oh, yeah.
but that force or that power is supposedly not to be the same energy which holds an atom together.
Well, remember, matter is energy.
Yes,
That
but
was
what
Einstein.
he said is that the energy started and was created at the Big Bang. So that means that beyond the Big Bang, that energy was not existent. Matter and energy and time and space did not exist beyond the singularity and the Big
Correct.
Bang.
And that's where
So,
quantum physics come in with that wave function stuff you started to mention. Right.
okay, but then the question is the wave function and that kind of stuff and quantum mechanics. And atheists, they love to bring up virtual particles and so forth.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Sorry.
But I mean, virtual particles, they are in time. They are not timeless.
Well, not only that,
So
but virtual particles always require real particles. Yeah. What's this guy's name? That I call him an
Yeah,
atheist.
Krauss, Lawrence Krauss. Yeah,
Yeah,
he
I
made
call
a
him
big name
freak.
out of this nonsense that virtual particles explain
Uh-huh.
the singularity and the Big Bang and so
Yeah.
forth.
He is not a scientist. Sorry.
Yeah, no, he's a he's a he's a pseudoscientist, of course.
Oh gosh.
But
Yeah, I've got a
you know, my problem is to understand that transition that there, and I had actually even an interaction with William Craig on that, and
oh cool.
I asked him, could it be that actually physical energy did exist prior to the universe, and even a physical realm, but on a higher dimension? Because we need that angels, they were assisting when God created the physical universe. I think it's in Job or so, where they were jubilating or singing or something like that when they were assisting God creating the universe. What that would mean is that God would not exist just himself in a timeless dimension beyond the universe. There would eventually already be a heavenly realm which was created prior to the creation of the universe. And Craig, he agreed with me. He said that is a reasonable hypothesis that could eventually be. Then, of course, we would have to understand the whole time frame, not that there was just a God alone, and then that he created the singularity, the Big Bang, and the physical universe, but that eventually God was at the beginning alone, but then he created the heavenly orders, the heavenly reality, the angels, and Satan, and the ones that the fallen angels and everything else, and eventually after that he created the universe. That would be a possibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's been the basic understanding that I've had, most of my life. But yeah, that's all of a spiritual. That's something I don't think we'll learn from a natural science perspective. Standing for Truth asked an interesting question. If you want to help,
let's go here. What are the EVO's most common arguments for abiogenesis? I'm interviewing a PhD biochemist on Wednesday, and I want to destroy all the rescue devices. Okay, there are two hypotheses, which is the RNA world hypothesis and the metabolism first hypothesis. And I have videos on those, SFT, if you want. You can, they are on my YouTube channel, Intelligent Design Academy, and there I address the RNA world hypothesis. And I think you've seen the first part of these videos, Joel, and then I explained why there is absolutely no evidence that RNAs can form prebiotically. So there is one point. And of course, the RNA hypothesis doesn't address only the RNA molecules, but also the self-replication. And they claim that it is possible that RNAs, they started to polymerize and then to self-replicate. I have an article on that, and I explain step by step why all this kind of hypotheses is nonsense. It doesn't work. There is no empirical evidence that RNA can self-replicate. That these hypotheses of ribozymes that they can self-replicate.
oh, where'd he go? I see myself still here, but where did Ontangelo go?
Oh, sorry.
There you are.
Connected myself while I was putting the paper on it. Let me just post it here on the chat. So SFT can have a look at it. Now I don't know how to take away that that comment here because I was disconnected.
Hmm. You just said RNA world first and metabolism first. Is that what you're asking?
The two hypotheses, the main hypothesis, and the metabolism first doesn't work either, because you need carbon as basic building block of life and hydrocarbons.
Right.
All
Sure.
hydrocarbons, they are synthesized, they are reduced from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and the main mechanism is photosynthesis, which makes glucose, but there are actually 6 different carbon fixation pathways. And what they suppose is that the first carbon fixation cycles were the Wood-Ljungdahl pathway and the reverse TCA cycle. Now, the problem is that these cycles, they are already very advanced, and they use enzymes which are interconnected one with each other, and these are metabolic production lines which make the hydrocarbons. And of course, these enzymes, they use carbon, so that's a catch-22 problem, because you need enzymes which use carbon to make carbon, but you need carbon to make these enzymes. So what came first? So what they hypothesize is that there were clays and metals on the prebiotic earth which somehow promoted the fixation of carbon dioxide, and then there was a supposed transition from that prebiotic production of carbon to the enzymatic production of carbon. But as I explained, that's a catch-22 problem.
Yep.
So that doesn't work. And I think it was Leslie Orgel which pointed out that the metabolism first hypothesis doesn't work because these mechanisms on prebiotic earth, they are too unspecific. I mean, the whole pathway of these cycles is very specific. There are intermediates which are precisely the ones that the next enzyme uses to continue to manufacture the molecules, and they hand them over to the next enzyme and the next enzymes, and that are at least 9 steps. So how that came to be, that is unexplained. So both the explanations, they don't work. Neither the metabolism first nor the RNA world hypothesis works. And I mean, there are over 40 different explanations, and one is the lipids first, and the other is the cofactors, sulfur world, iron sulfur cofactors first, because enzymes, they use cofactors which are made by iron and sulfur. And there are so many different hypotheses, but the truth is, and I have a video on this, is that the cell is irreducibly complex. It has to emerge all at once. If you don't have the membrane and the membrane channels working in a joint venture right from the start, you don't have homeostasis inside of the cell. And for example, you need a calcium concentration 10,000 times less inside of the cell than on the outside, because otherwise you can't have calcium signaling. And calcium signaling is life essential. So how did that come to be? So there are problems over problems. There are so many problems with this.
I've got an even simpler way of kind of winning that debate. If you guys want to hear the common, the whole idea that there's other chemicals like they always try to insinuate that mimic nucleotide bonding in nature. They're called peptide nucleic acids. They have nothing to do with the nucleotides. They are essentially imidogen type chemical bonding. They're plastics. It's nylon. Nylon is a peptide nucleic acid.
No, the bonding problem is a huge problem. They don't know how the base is bound to the ribose. They don't know how the ribose is bound to the phosphate. They don't know how the polymerization of RNA can occur without enzymes, because you need energy, you need the 3-phosphate nucleotides in order to have the energy for polymerization. So these are all huge problems, and they are unexplained by science.
Well-
Science is completely clueless to explain how all this emerged prebiotically and without enzymes.
Well, actually, on Tegelo, what I've been actually debating for quite some time now is that we fully understand how those nucleic acidic bonds do form, and you've described them as well. The problem is not that we don't know how they happen in a prebiotic method. The fact is that through chemistry we know for a fact that it cannot happen. I started to touch on it the other night with your group, where with that guy named Dimitri, where if you have a truly natural what's called a free floating phosphate bath, where nucleic acids are not protected like they are in living nanotechnology factories, like I call a living cell, if they're not segregated and protected from other peptide bonds and other phosphate bonding, then they will instantly react. The hydrogen, the loose hydrogen bonds and the sugar bonds will instantly react with the extra phosphates and turn into random polyphosphates, which are absolutely useless for life.
Yes,
so it's not that we don't know how it happened. We know for a fact it cannot happen scientifically. And again, the other argument to destroy them with their presumption that artificial peptide nucleic acids have self-arranged organization. That's true, but that has nothing to do with life. Life is not plastic.
Well, there is also a huge problem. Dimitar, he came up all the time with selection, but as I said, there was no selection prebiotically. Molecules, they do not have any urge to be selected.
Right.
Then he brought up that the temperature thing, that if the temperature is higher, then there is a different selection than when it's lower. But this is not selection. This is a reaction. This is reaction.
Phosphates don't care what the temperature is, right?
Exactly. And there is another problem, a huge problem, that, for example, the nucleotides, the base is attached always at the 2' position, and the phosphate is always attached at the 5' position, and there is no, and yes, and the backbone is also right-handed homochiral. So how does that order occur prebiotically? Because the phosphate can attach at any prime position, and so the base, and you will have simply chaos, and you need millions of nucleotides which can then form a genetic molecule, a chromosome. And if you even have such an information-bearing molecule and structure, so what if you don't have the machinery to translate and to transcribe it?
Right. Which that information, that machinery, as you described it, is required to create the new self-protected nucleotide bonding to recreate or copy the existing information. So again, the argument isn't how did it happen. The argument fails because it cannot happen. If you take those same exact chemicals and you just put them together in a natural state, they will not form nucleic bonds or nucleotides. Excuse me. They will turn into polyphosphates. It's impossible.
Not only that, as I constantly repeat, and that has been clearly outlined by James Tour and also by Steve Benner in his paper in 2012, the paradoxes of life. And he says that molecules, they do not complexify, they randomize.
Right.
They become asphalts. And this is, in my understanding, one of the major abiogenesis killers. The fact that molecules do not self-organize themselves into information-bearing genetic molecules and codes and information transmission systems and machines and machine assembly lines and factories. That simply is complete pseudoscientific nonsense.
Well, to help answer SFT's question, there are exceptions to that rule that you just stated on Tangle. There are molecules out there that will self-align. We've got the buckyballs, like we got nylon, like I talked about. There are all kinds of artificial peptides out there that are, again, they're artificial. They don't really exist in nature. But if you combine the right known chemicals together, if you put them in a beaker, for example, it'll look like a gluey soup. And you stick a needle in there and you pull it out, it will form a chain. Nylon, it's how it's made. Nylon thread.
Okay, but
But
there
it has
is always
nothing to do with
some.
life, though. It's nothing to do
Yes,
with
but there
nucleotide.
is always a chemist which knows
and I-
which are the materials that eventually can form these structures. But in a general sense, you cannot just take random elements in a prebiotic earth and then wait. What will happen? Nothing.
And that's what I'm saying, is that not only is there no plastic in life, there's only organic bonds. There's no plastic or artificial or inorganic bonds. But these artificial peptide bonds, these or peptide nucleic acids, can't store information. They're very simplistic bonding. Again, it's a mechanical thing. And so even if you were to try to create some sort of other form of life that doesn't exist today at all anywhere, then it can't transfer information. It'd be just a long set of ones instead of all the four different bits that we have in a nucleotide.
Yeah, Speed, in one of the chats which he came in, I think it was last Friday, he said, oh, it is just on prebiotic earth, it was chemical reactions and so forth.
Yeah,
And you see that very frequently, that atheists, they come up and say, oh, it's just chemical reactions.
Yeah.
And there are even atheists which don't understand the difference between software and hardware.
Right.
And Davis, he wrote some books in regards of the origin of life, and he was amazing how he was able to explain the problem, which is you need to have a relationship between prescribed complex instructional information, then the information transmission system, and then the ability to transform that information into an equivalent device which is precisely made upon that instructional information. And that relationship is always the product of intelligence. And
Yep.
that's precisely what we see in the cell, where we have the genome, which directs the construction and then the operation and control and adaptation to the environment of the machines, of the proteins, and the entire cell factory, and also where it has to divide. There is information stored how many division cycles that the cell can have, and if you have one more or less division cycles, then you have cancer.
Yep.
And all this is pre-programmed information.
Right. So not only do you have to have that information to start with, but you also have to have the nucleotide bonding has to start first as well. Because again, nucleotides cannot form naturally at all. It's not that it's improbable or we don't know how. That's the argument I like to make, Standing. It's that it cannot happen. You have to have a preformed nucleic acid, a preformed nucleotide of nucleic acid chains to be able to copy them. Because you have to start with a nucleotide first to be able to basically unzip it the way life does, and then zip it back together, adding the copy to the replicated nucleic acids in a specific order. If you don't have it without a pre-existing nucleotide, you cannot create nucleotides at all. It's impossible. It's chemically impossible.
Yes, I list here the whole chain of problems is getting the basic elements to make the building blocks of life. That is, carbon and nitrogen is not simply available on the prebiotic earth, but it has to be fixed. That is, nitrogen is dinitrogen, which is in the atmosphere. We have 78% of dinitrogen in the atmosphere. And we have today cyanobacteria, which use nitrogenase enzymes to fix nitrogen in a very, very complex process. It is a triple bond which has to be broken. And there are, in 2016, they came up, they brought up a science paper claiming that nitrogenase was extant at the last universal common ancestor. And that's just crazy, because that's a hugely complex enzyme. How could that have formed prebiotically? That's just nonsense. That's the first problem. Then you need to have carbon in useful form. As I explained before, the metabolic first proposal doesn't work because the enzymes were not available to make the transformation, the fixation of the carbon. Then the RNA world, there is no mechanisms to make nucleotides. The transition from RNA to DNA requires ribonucleotide reductase proteins, which are enormously complex.
Yep.
I have an article on that. How did those come to be? And we know that all life forms use DNA, and DNA is stable while RNA is not. And that is good because DNA has to be stable to be able to store information for a long time, and RNA has to be able to be recycled in the cell and reused for having other messenger RNAs all the time. Then the synthesis of RNA and DNA to have polymers, to have polymerization. There is no prebiotic mechanism known. Then the eigenthreshold, you need more complexity to have replication. Then obtaining the genetic code, the triplet codons, there is no known mechanism how to have the universal genetic code. And then the mitochondrial codes, which are different, the transition, nobody now knows how that works. Then the genetic code is more robust than 1 million different ones that has been tested. And then there is overlapping codes in DNA because there are the transcription factors that bind to the DNA to express the DNA at the right moment in time, and they need to know where the section is to be found. And then, as we talked today earlier, the amazing information storage capacity of DNA, then getting the information in the genome, that is another question. You have the DNA molecule, you have the genetic code, that is the language, but then you need the prescriptive, the complex instructional information, that is another level of information which has to be explained. And then, of course, you need the machinery to express the information, the whole process of sending, of encoding, sending, and decoding of the information to make the proteins. So all this level of complexification here, hey, there is not an explanation to any of which I am mentioning here. None. There is no explanation.
Yeah, if I may encourage you in taking a little, some of the best arguments to be made are to try to keep things as simple as possible. You know, engineers, we like to take the complex and reduce them to the lowest common denominators, we often say. So
I
all
like
of that,
I like my factory argument
Mhm.
because it is something which a layman can actually understand, and you can ask here, just say yes or no. How are all those things, the origin of those, better explained through chance or intelligence? And
Right.
you can mention each of those here, and we see all these kind of things inside of the cell.
But if we overwhelm our debate opponent with information, then it'd be more easily for them to dismiss it. Versus if we try to keep something simple, for example, all of this can be simplified in my mind to, again, make a direct comparison. So we have this massive complexity that we can describe that they need to explain, of course. You know, so that's a very fine argument.
When I called in at the line, sorry to interrupt you, Joel. When I called into the line and I talked to Matt Dillahunty, and he conveniently did hang up on me, I asked him, if you see an instructional blueprint and you see a machine in the factory made precisely upon the instruction of that blueprint, and you don't know the source of both, and you have two options, one is chance and the other intelligence, what explains the blueprint and the machines and the factory better? Is it intelligence or chance? That is a very simple question. And of course, if you don't mention the cell, then everyone will say, of course, it's intelligence. But as soon as you point out that that is what we see in the cell, then they will say, oh, but there we have human intelligence. And in regards of the cell, we don't know.
Right, but that's not going to help win debates, I'm afraid. People are going to be married to their religion. So again, it's just as an encouragement, as a strategy, as an example, we compare all of the complexity of living cells, all this technology, to what like RFT was asking, to the technology, so to say, of an artificial peptide, for example, the plastics that I was mentioning. It's like literally comparing something, to keep it real simplistic. You're literally comparing making a rocket engine out of nothing but the same shape Lego, and hope that it get it to space. That is the comparison that we make with a living cellular factory, with the arguments that the evolutionists will say just happened by random chance.
It's a good illustration, yes.
A rocket engine out of Legos. Not just Legos, but only a single shape of a Lego. That's the kind of explanations and processes they hope started life. That's crazy.
Yeah. You are right, Joel. We need to simplify. We need to attempt to explain in a simple way, as if it would be to a 6-year-old, in order for him to understand.
Yeah.
But the problem is, as you mentioned before, it is religion, because naturalism is a religion, and to remove that and to replace it with what is true, that is a spiritual problem.
No, I agree. Yeah, there's two kinds of faith in the world. There's blind faith, which is actually against the Bible, versus evidence-based faith, like 1 Peter 3:15 says, encourages Christians to have. Atheism is the religion in the world that literally relies on blind faith without evidence on purpose.
Well, they will avoid to say that they have faith, and they will resort to the ignorance. I don't know, but science is working on it, and science one day will find out, and when it finds out, it will be a natural explanation.
Well, again, there's nothing natural about nature. That's what I would say to that argument.
Yeah. But we know what they mean by that. They say that the material world is all there is, and everything can be explained within the universe.
Well, and again, you're talking about, you're wanting to get into the wonderful world of quantum mechanics. That destroys all of that. In fact, that reminds me of a quote that I love to share from Heisenberg. If you give me a second to bring that up. He says, and this is a summary of his quote. He says, "The concept of objective reality has thus evaporated into the transparent clarity of mathematics. The universe is it's just not real. It's literally everything that we think exists is, science proves, is literally the figment of God's imagination, according to quantum physics." So yeah, materialism is anti-science, or naturalism.
Yeah, and of course there is the whole thing that the entire universe is built up with physical laws which are bound to mathematics.
Yep. I love how John Lennox won his debate with Richard Dawkins about that point. He says that something along the lines, and I've got the YouTube video of it, the clip of it, where there are natural laws, even though they're not natural really. They're just explanations for what we see in nature.
Yeah, there always comes that objection by atheists. They say, well, the physical laws, they are not prescribed, they are described. We just describe what we discover. But you have to ask, of course, why do the physical laws obey mathematics?
Order and structure, information, right? So this is all stuff that's purely immaterial.
That's why it is so fantastic that we see in John 1 and in Genesis that God used his word to make all things, to create all things. That's where it resumes to.
Yes, sir. How would you simplify Logic's name there? LPP. What do you? Is there an easier way to call you?
Yeah, people usually call me LPP, or you just call me John. That matter to me.
Well, hey, John.
Hi, John.
What's up, guys? I'm enjoying listening to what y'all have been talking about. Yeah, it really is interesting. Joel, the point you just made about information is immaterial. It's actually, I find it rather fascinating. The level, the extreme to which so many atheists are going now, where they literally are arguing and insisting that information is material.
Yeah, it's not.
That's
And-
actually what Leo Filio said in my debate with him on abiogenesis, and he was unable to make the distinction between software and hardware.
Well, the thing I find so interesting is, in line with what you just said there, is like they seem incapable of grasping the premise that the material housing the information does not also equal the semantic meaning of it.
Okay,
And
that's word salad.
huh?
So that whatever that argument is, that sounds like word salad to me off the top.
Well, no. So okay, so if you have wooden block letters
Mm-hmm.
and you spell out creation,
Okay.
or you write creation on a piece of paper, or you have creation typed out on your computer and on your phone,
Mhm.
the medium which contains the structure of those letters that equal create the word, the meaning of the word creation, with the medium which contains it has absolutely zero bearing on what the actual interpreted meaning is.
Yes. That
And that's the line of demarcation that I've noticed many atheists just refuse to even address,
okay.
or they like consciously deny the reality of that entire point, and therefore it doesn't matter. And this is where this is part of the reason they argue so strongly for the whole it's just chemical reactions argument, or we just interpret it as a code, it's not really a code, and those kind of logic. And it's like, no, the medium doesn't matter. Is the point?
Exactly. You can write John loves Mary on a sand dune. You can write it on a piece of paper. You can put it in a computer software, but the meaning is the same. The medium is different, but the meaning is the same. So
semiotics of it, right?
The realm of software is mental. It is not material, and that's of course what they try to avoid at any cost, because in the end, that was actually 2 times when I called into the atheist experience and I said that genes host the blueprint, then they denied it, And when I called in at the line with Jimmy Snow, and I said that genes host prescribed information, then he denied it. And that's the crux of the issue, because at the moment that you actually admit that there is prescribed or instructional information stored in the genetic code, then you cannot deny that that information must come from God.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. By the way, I really appreciate how James Torer put that last year in his lecture, where he says how you guys probably are familiar with it. He says information is primary, the matter is secondary. But I'm telling you, there are public references. There are web pages out there that have entire genome code fully available for any of us to go there and look at it together. And there's all kinds of different interpretation software programs out there, different varieties to try to do something with it. You can even edit gene code online.
Yep.
Try to make different purposes, make it do different things in simulations and emulators. That's code. So if anybody wanted to argue, if someone would have told me, hey, genes aren't the genetic code's not code, I'm like, you're okay. You want to go do some? You want to go do some gene coding together? Let's go to the website. It's ridiculous.
What I think is fun, to your point on you can even do reverse translation. There's some tools I've messed around. There's one I've messed around with. You can do reverse translation of from like amino acid backwards and such. It cracks me up. I'm like, I did actually create a doc one time, and I had the helicase script or sequence in codons, amino acids, and binary. And I'm like,
how do you translate 4-bit to 2-bit? Is my first question, but go for it.
Well, I mean, I in terms of the letters,
okay,
it's binary.
Assembly, I think binary. Go ahead.
The point I'm making is that they're all code, right? And each one of them equals the same thing. If you have the appropriate interpretation translation mechanism, they all equal the same thing. Is the point?
Yes,
and
correct.
So you made a custom assembly language, is what you're saying. It sounds like.
No. I literally just took the here's the codon. Here's the codon sequence. Here's the what this equals in just amino acids, and then I translated that into pure binary equalization.
I gotta see that, man. You're talking about like regular old push pull type stuff in a register type system.
No, I know. I literally just took the sequence and then went over to a binary translator and then put it and then copied and pasted it. But it was more just from a visualization of the point, right? Like
I got you.
This is this protein could be okay. Like basically, I could if you could let's say you could modify a ribosome to read binary, right? You could theoretically run a binary translation through the ribosome, and it would translate that into the appropriate amino acids. It was the point.
Matter of fact, we do that. We do. We try to, but yeah.
Well, I know we can do it. That's my point. Like, I just wanted to have it for myself, like for visualization, to show people, be like, for crying out loud, folks, this equals this. Like, all three of these equal this. Like, equal the same thing. Like, this is not some kind of pie in the sky supposition. This is a literal phenomenon. Which, to your point, this is why I find it so ironic. And you're talking about the different tools and emulators and such. It's like, how the heck can you possibly create an emulator unless there's a syntax to be able to execute? Like, you can't do this otherwise. Like, there's no other way around this. Like, this has to exist,
Right. Not just syntax, but purpose. Everything, like I think I said this recently, everything in information science, the entire industry, the only purpose for information science in general is to take nonsense, useless data, and make it useful, give it a purpose, give it a syntax. Otherwise, it's not information.
Yeah, they really do love to just dance around the obvious. And you guys were talking, before I came on, you guys were discussing, some of the things of, the mechanisms that are required. And I'd say something I find very fascinating are the topoisomerase proteins. And like you have to have both type 1 and type 2. Otherwise, you can't unwind.
What are you talking about? Type 1, type 2 for what?
For the topoisomerase enzymes.
See, that's I don't know what that is.
so they're the proteins that like overwind and underwind DNA, like pre-expression, and like one of them cuts. I think it's type 1.
I've heard of line 1.
Huh?
I've heard of line 1 transposons and stuff. Is that something similar or different?
Hang on, I have to check. They may be in that category. I don't know. These, I just found out these kind of relatively recently. Otangelo Sal Cordova showed me these. They're basically like when it's unwinding, one of them cuts like half of the strand of the helix so that it can slide through the correct way. The other one literally cuts it all the way and then reconnects it as the unwind happens. Okay. So it slices it, like cuts it in half, lets the appropriate like twist happen, and then reconnects it as soon as the the process has happened. And basically, Salvador was showing me a really cool animation of it. The basically you couldn't have DNA unwind for expression without these two proteins, and you can't just have one of them. If you have one of them, you have utter collapse. You have to have both, because they basically like work together, and it's one of those like ultimate chicken and egg problems.
Right.
And it's also recognized to be one of the, per the evolutionary timeline, they recognize that it has to have been in place basically at the very beginning. So it's like, okay, let's just add another chicken and egg problem to the ultimate chicken and egg problem. But if you're getting to the point where it's like, per your own admission, you can't have gene expression without these proteins, like, how do you get around this? Like, this is before you even start talking about helicase and everything else. Like, you got to have these. And now we're getting into the, thousands of amino acids in length. And
you guys don't mind. Speed of sound, if you've got to go real quick, I'd love to help address that question if he raised before he has to go.
He is making that claim here. Self-generating information is not that difficult to figure out. How would you answer to that, Joel?
Yeah, if I hope you got a little bit of time, Speed. I was going to mention how we try to do that in artificial intelligence and machine language fields. And we early on, back like in the 70s and the 80s, even we used to try to do that. We would take what's called word dictionaries. If you're familiar with Linux, there's real popular what they call dictionary sets of several hundreds of thousands. Some libraries have millions of words that we use to create random word generators, essentially. And we would try to do exactly what you're talking about, where we would try to create some sort of useful information or test our AI filters based on just a random word generation set. And we abandoned that decades ago. It's stupid. It's not just impossible. It was a horrible effort at best. And then early on in the 90s and the early 2000s, we used to use what's called spider web bots, where we would just basically sure, yeah, we'd love to go more details. You said you're about to go for the night. Where we also try to just let our AIs just randomly scrub the web. Google uses spider bots, for example, to just little subroutines that randomly just go read websites and look for specific keywords and whatnot. Prodigy used to do it. AOL used to do it. Google does it now, and create all these just giant lists of hopefully useful information to help do different purposes. And so we used to try to use that with other AIs as well. And it's self-defeating. It's the more chaos theory describes it best. The more complex a system becomes through chaos, through natural whatever means, the faster it self-destructs. So that if DNA and whatever else we're going to look at as information sets follow all the rules that everything else follows, then DNA could not. Information does not self-evolve. It just doesn't.
And you need the initial information to have the first proteome, and you don't have evolution to do that because it had to be there when self-replication and life began. So
Right.
How do you explain the origin of the minimal genome to have life starting?
Well, only that, but like you were talking about earlier tonight, Antangelo, the whole chemical bonding part of it has to also pre-exist. And I was trying to iterate how nucleotides themselves cannot scientifically or physically self-create. The bonding in a free-floating phosphate bath instantly causes polyphosphates to react instead of a
Yes,
nucleotide.
but let's suppose that problem would be solved and you had nucleotides
man.
which somehow would be able to bond together
That
to
would be
make
quite
to make a nucleotide string polymerization. That would be possible. Now,
possible. And it's a two-pronged problem. Not only do you have to have
no, Joel, I'm just making a hypothesis. Let's suppose that problem would be overcome. We would have the genetic alphabet, we would have the nucleotides, we would have the possible random polymerization possible, and then you would say, okay, now produce an informational string which bears instructional information which can be used to make useful proteins.
Well, that's what I was trying to get at. So it's a two-pronged problem. Not only is it physically impossible for nucleotides to form themselves, but the information that John was talking about also has to pre-exist to be able to even to create those type 1, type 2 type proteins that allow the pre-existing chemical bonds to be able to re-replicate themselves. All of that has to pre-exist. It cannot. The information on top of the actual physical structure has to exist before it can exist.
The problem is that, as I said before, the relationship between the genome and the proteome, there has to be the link which we know is now the transcription and the translation, which was not there. So if you are able to make a genome, so what? But if you are able to make prebiotically a proteome set, a set of proteins which are working together, hey, how do you go from that to the relationship of the genome with the proteomes and the machinery, the interlinked machinery, which promotes that process from information making proteins?
Right. Yeah, it's like leading a donkey with the carrot without the carrot, basically.
That's why I say the cell is irreducibly complex. You need to have everything there right from the beginning. And for who understands molecular biology, this isn't difficult to understand and to grasp.
Yeah, I was just thinking of another point to add to the AI aspect of information be able to randomly generate itself. So the late some of the actually it's not the latest anymore, but it's probably second or third generation AI technology. IBM's Watson, if you guys are familiar with that AI, tried to basically take pre-existing useful data. Essentially, they were trying to break into the healthcare system, try to help Watson to help doctors make diagnostics, especially for cancer research, for ontology stuff, on whatever it's called.
I think he had a company working with that.
There were several, yeah,
Mhm.
and governments as well were trying to help it do it. And there was one big one, I forget who, down in Houston, Texas, that was trying to. The thing was though is that they had pre-existing information. It was not random. It was data sets, actual test cases and diagnoses and prognoses that had already been successful or failed or whatever. And so Watson was trying to basically decide on current cases that it was fed with the pre-existing data sets that were already intelligent, that were already information, and it still was not reliable. It was still causing failures, and so that's why it's not really being used today. The doctors themselves were still doing a better prognosis, for making better predictions than the AI with the same information.
Yeah, I think if we just consider what we talked tonight, then you can basically say that the entire abiogenesis research program is just money thrown through the window.
It's absolutely a waste of time. Like I said, that's what I argue. It's not that we don't know, or that it's not probable for nucleotides to form. It's impossible. It cannot happen.
It's a problem of the origin of the hardware and also the software. It's a problem of both.
Yes, I use that example. That's where I describe the failures of the RNA world, as they call it. RNA is only able to be transcribed off of DNA. And so, like I think I explained it the other night,
Yes.
RNA is a packetized piece of information off of DNA. So it's literally claims for RNA to be able to create life is literally like claiming the internet that can be created without computers.
Well, the thing is that there is no life form known which doesn't use DNA.
Right. It's just, yeah.
And nonetheless, they say, oh, well, it started with RNA and then it became more complex. And always when a materialist or a proponent of abiogenesis comes up with protocells, then I say, hey, this guy is talking nonsense. He's talking junk.
Did you hear how Dr. Tour explained that one?
Oh, he has wonderful videos. I think that picture where he shows the car with all the pieces laid on the floor, it lines up exactly with Hoyle's Tornado and the Jumbo illustration, and also the Watchmaker. I mean, this is an argument which is a knockdown, and which atheists try to overcome by claiming evolution when there was no evolution to explain the origin of life.
I was referring to his lecture where he was talking about how he liked to work on cars as a kid, and he explains that the artificial cell, the proto-life cell thing, they say it's like literally taking an engine out of one car, putting it into another car, and say, "Hey, look, I made that car."
Yes, that is what the experiments where they claimed that they made an artificial cell, where they simply took the genome from one bacteria and put it into their artificial cell, and then they claimed, oh, we made a new cell. Well, no, they didn't. I mean, you need to start really from the scratch. You need to start by making carbon and ammonia. That's where you have to start.
Well, one of the funny things about that experiment too, that doesn't really get talked about as much, is they actually ran into a major problem when they were trying to do the like inserting new gene functions and trying to edit. The restriction enzymes kept getting in the way and literally terminating what they were trying to insert. And
CRISPR solved that.
Huh?
CRISPR, you're familiar with that?
Yeah, I'm familiar with CRISPR, but I'm saying when they were trying to insert gene sequences from the other car, right?
Oh,
they weren't of the same
genome.
same genome. So the restriction enzymes in the bacteria terminated the genes from the yeast cell where they were trying to take it from.
Right.
And so they actually had to figure out a way to basically deprogram that defense mechanism, and then we're able to put it in there. And
Right.
it was like a crazy, like complex thing. And that's one of the things I always find interesting about, like, okay, so bacteria, like prokaryotes, can do some horizontal gene transfer, but the second you go up a level, you run into massive restriction enzyme barriers and toxin, the toxin antitoxin security protocols. And
Right.
it's like, how do you argue that there is horizontal gene transfer when we literally observe when all other DNA comes into the equation, there's literally things that go in and annihilate it.
Right.
And like, how do you explain this? And then argue that somehow this is something that explains a evolutionary development. That's the part that gets me.
Right. And that's part of what we're trying to reverse engineer for actual human technology. We're trying to recreate those exact processes for our own technology. And even CRISPR itself, that I've heard people talk about, well, CRISPR solves it. No, CRISPR is also not natural. It's not a human design. They found that as an autoimmune system pre-built into bacteria specifically to help do what you just described, fight errors from horizontal transfers.
Yep. Yeah, the whole CRISPR tech, I think it's amazing. What's been, especially now, what's the latest one, CRISPR 9A, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And being able to do single nucleotide, that's nuts.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's cool. We're gonna do a lot of really cool, fun stuff with it, but it's not natural.
No, not in the slightest. And the other part of it to me that as cool as all that stuff is, and I think it's amazing, until we figure out how to modify the actually, let me rephrase. Until we learn to interpret what the heck the epitranscriptome means, who cares? Like, yeah, congratulations. You can, it's like being able to, it's like, oh, sweet. You can change the CSS. Kudos, bro. Like,
right?
You don't know, you can't access the source files, like, and you're getting oh, cool. A little CSS modification. Woo, it looks a little different. You haven't changed anything in the core code. Like, kudos, bro.
We're not even able to touch the HMI of the operating system level. On Tangelo was showing earlier, he has like a 24 long list of different epigenetic type structures or systems. And what I thought I understood already, that what he's showing, that's a whole nother universe.
It's nuts, isn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy.
And that's why I think the other night we were talking, I was talking about, like, we have to start, like, literally considering the premise of APIs, the equivalent of APIs. In genetics. Like, we've got the glycan, you've got like there's all this other stuff happening, and the signaling proteins from the outside of the cell. It's kind of like all those different the hormonal protocols. It's like there's no telling. What is it we know of right now on Tangelo? There's like 30 something different, like, known ones. We haven't interpreted them all yet, but we know they exist. There's no telling what else is out there.
I can put the list here again. I think I've listed 24 different epigenetic languages.
It's amazing. And then, but they're different. So it's like, that's why I say in the context of the API, like, something's going down here. That's why I find some of the arguments being made against this to be, it's like, are you this ignorant of modern technology? Like,
yeah, that's exactly it.
This is so directly equivalent. I don't know how you can, like, oh, it's just a quasi analogy. Like, no. This is literal. This is literal comparison. This is not hyperbole,
Well, and that's where I go back to talking about how even microbiologists talk about they have to have, it's a requirement to have some level of software engineering now to understand these things, to understand what an application layer is, to understand what an HMI layer is. These are things that you see in the genetic code. And if you don't understand these actual software layers of information exchange, you can't understand the genetic code.
Well, it's often how sometimes I wonder when I'm listening to Tangelo, like our favorite Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal, when I listen to him make these arguments and try to sound very, intellectually superior, And I'm like, what's going through my mind oftentimes is when I listen to these guys talk, I'm like, you don't even understand how dumb you sound right now in the context of your explanation of for how this came into existence. Like,
It's not very nice.
it's like, dude, you're literally arguing that you ran a backup script and somehow you went from having Hello World to Google. I mean, this is what you're arguing. I mean, you'll get a crack up. This will crack you up, Joel. In my very first debate over on Modern Day Debate, I took on RJ Downard, and I argued. I was like, so are you suggesting that Google, Facebook, and Snapchat and YouTube that we're currently on right now, are you suggesting that given enough time, the code that's required for this debate to happen could come into existence without an intelligent agent? And he actually said yes. And I'm just like, there's no, at that point, I'm like, I don't even know what to say at this point. Like, if you're actually going to argue, if you're going to operate from a worldview that says that that's a remotely plausible conclusion, then you're just nuts. Like, you're living in fantasy land.
Well, and to add to that, someone from my experience and background, Google's not that complicated. Sorry. So yeah.
Yeah, it really is starting to like, I joke about this, but I say they jump the shark on a daily basis of some of the arguments keep being made. You're like, are you kidding me? Like, you do realize what was just discovered last week, right? Oh, amazing. We just found out this whole new crazy nanotech component of biological system that blows our minds.
Right.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to double down. I'm going to double down on evolution. I mean, it's like, okay.
Well, and that's why I often argue that evolution, it's really just it's a religious belief. It's an act of faith, and I share my college experience as well. It's frustrating, and I used to work for Musk and things, and he talks about how college is not for learning anymore. It's just for fun, and so there's I describe higher education now these days, especially public and state-sponsored schools. They're like atheist churches, really. They're 20 plus years behind in anything. In fact, I started my first undergrad in chemical engineering while I was already working for Texas Instruments doing quantum plasma physics. And I go to these classes and I'm like, Professor, this is something that they were working on back in the 70s and 80s. This is what we're doing today. And they had no clue. And some of my professors hated me for bringing that up. My other professors would love me. They're like, yeah, tell us more. Bring us to the class. And so there's just this deep chasm of lack of information being taught in a lot of these higher education academic places. And so people just don't know. They don't know what they don't know. And I don't know. I don't know how to help people kind of break out of that.
Well, it's interesting you say that. So when I had my development,
I apologize, Antangelo, if you were trying to show us something.
Yes. Do you guys know the blog of John Lief?
Say that again.
There is a blog. I can put the link from Jon Lief. He has just launched the book, The Secret Language of Cells. And this is one of the best guys in regards of codified information in the cell. And he has just launched this book here. And if you guys are interested in the topic, this is worth reading, this book. I think it's very recent that it's out.
Let's see.
I got Brian Ford, the same Miller's title, The Secret Language of Cells, not life.
Okay. Is he got a new one coming out? There's another one that's saying expected September 22nd of this year.
Is it similar to Francis Collins' The Language of God book? Do you know?
No, this is specifically in regards of cell codes, of what we are talking about.
Okay, it looks like he's got a follow-up book coming out later this month.
It came out September, or it's going to come out the 22nd of this month. It looks like the book you're talking about next Tuesday, 2 Tuesdays.
Yeah, and I'll show you his blog. It has fantastic information. It's really worth to have a look. It's really, really,
Nice.
really good.
I wonder if it'd help me do any future projects.
That is his blog. I'll put the link here so you guys can have a look.
Thank
He
you.
has tons of great information. It's really fantastic.
You can post it in the YouTube. There it goes.
Yes, I've put it here in the chat.
I see it.
I'll
now.
put it private as well.
And
And
Joe,
he writes that cells even communicate through photons, through light.
Really?
Yeah.
yeah, I'd actually read a paper. I've been trying to find it again. This was last year sometime. I read a paper where they were basically making the argument that there is the equivalent of like a cellular signal network
Mm-hmm.
going on in biological systems.
Yeah,
And-
I have that on my
Yeah, no,
library.
yeah, and like basically, like yes, we have the hormone signals, we have all these different things, but they're also arguing that there's literal equivalent of cell phone signals also being sent.
It is a literal internet in our body where cells even have communication on a long range with each other.
Well, and I tell you, I watched a very fascinating Google Tech Talk from like 2012, and it was a quantum physicist who had gotten into genetics, and she was actually making the argument that on multiple levels. One, that there's evidence for signals being sent down the DNA itself, and also that they had done some preliminary experiments. And I've been trying to find more information on this because this was like 2012 when she was giving this talk, and I've been trying to find like papers on this. She was making the argument that they had done experiments that if they were able to alter the quantum information state of a sequence, even if they left the codons themselves intact, they were seeing negative outcomes in translation. And which I thought was rather fascinating. That puts a whole new layer of a whole new layer of conundrum for the evolutionists to solve, as well as the just the additional layer of complexity into the equation.
So
Yeah,
let
I've
me
been-
just play that shortly here. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting
Here-
things like that in terms of the lines there. I mean, you know how the atheists always love to use the eye is bad design and all the like it's wired backwards and such. I knew I had read something about how that whole argument had been debunked, and I couldn't remember what it was. I decided yesterday I decided to start rereading Michael Behe's Darwin
I have a
Devolves.
paper on that. I have a paper on
And-
that.
It was the fact that, and it was 2007 when that whole argument was debunked.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the fiber optics in the eye, and then that it's actually sending different wavelengths along those fiber optic connections to specific rods and cones that are specialized to those wavelengths. And if we didn't have that exactly the way it is, then we would have deprecated nighttime and daytime vision. I'm like, okay, just get out of town. This is to me when you think about that.
Yeah, I put the link. I have investigated this. You can have a look afterwards.
Yeah, my first thought
It
was
is actually a good design, and they acknowledge that now. It's well known that it's not bad design.
Well, and something else I find interesting. I was reading a paper. I actually got it in my public folder if anyone wants to see it. Specifically on the octopus eye, because they love to use that one. Did you know that it takes about 6 minutes for the octopus pupil to contract? Yeah, it's got some advantages in certain aspects, but if it was in the sunlight, that would be like all the time. That would be a major problem. Can you imagine if it took your eye, like you were dilated for 6 minutes every time you like came out of the dark and into the light, or vice versa? Like we'd be running into stuff all over the place.
I was going to add, Gary, I don't know if you guys know much about human camera technology. I used to work for a company called Pelco that was the original company that designed the first analog and then digital camera technology since like the 1960s. And so I'm pretty familiar with all the latest in human, advanced camera technology. Plus, my first job out of high school, I was trying to be a computer programmer, but long story short, I joined the Army, and I was an electronics guy that worked on all of the military's high-end, what do you call it, visual technology stuff as well, Apache TADS PinVis systems, for example. And so I know of, and I've worked on all of the basically the highest technology of camera technology there is known to man. And what we do, how we do things technologically wise is child's play compared to how the human eye works. The chromatic aberration inversion alone is light years. I mean, I don't know how many thousands of light years ahead of what we wish we could do in modern camera technology alone.
Yeah, when you really contemplate the level of variable perception we have in the extremes. Like the other night I was driving, and it's freaking September, and I'm driving around a curve, and I drove into a fog patch. I'm on this like little country road, and I'm like, number one, how the heck am I in fog in September? But whatever. And I was on a pretty small road that was like windy, and I'm somehow, I don't know how, but I was somehow managing to be able to stay on the road and not drive off. But I knew I was like on the edge, right? I don't know. I wasn't quite being able to, it was almost like I wasn't consciously being able to recognize things, but I was still being able to maintain while I was going through this fog patch, and obviously that bull, of course I slowed down and such, but to me, when you really think about that, just as an example, right, of whether it be fog, heavy rain, you're blinded by somebody with headlights on while it's in the middle of while it's pouring down rain, and you're on a curvy road, like just as an example, right? Like we manage to not only be able to visualize data, but also compute the input into almost in many contexts, like I was talking about in the driving, in an intuitive subconscious output, right?
And a rational interpretation of the data, right?
And without that ability, like we would die. There's so many different ways we would die, if we didn't have that computational ability. And I think that it's, when you hear all the people talk about like, oh, well, supercomputers are, superior to the human brain.
No.
And I'm like, no, they might be able to do computations better than our conscious brain or conscious portion of our brain. But they are, well, I'm talking about in a very hyper specific, like this specific task.
Well, after you finish your point, I want to ask you about the K, if you know anything about the K computer, but please finish.
But the point I was going to make was when you look at it in the context of the computation power of our brain overall, it's not even in the same stratosphere. Like, for example, a couple years ago, I remember reading this article about, the headline was, supercomputers equal human brain.
Nope.
And of course I go and read the thing, and they had connected like a ridiculous amount of computers, several petabytes of memory, all this kind of stuff. Anyway, and they had managed to quote unquote replicate 7 seconds of human brain activity.
No.
And I'm like, yeah, okay. get out of town. You don't even act like don't even be arrogant and claim that you've come close. 7 seconds, and I bet you weren't even actually being able to account for who knows how many other brain, computational functions are occurring that we don't even know about yet.
Well, just to quickly address all that, that's complete fraud. So the Fujitsu Corporation Fujitsu, in Japan, they have been working on that problem for many years. They have what's called their famous K supercomputer. I forget how many tens of thousands of petabytes a second it can do. They've been actively trying to simulate the human brain ability to process. Just last year, they were able to successfully finally simulate 1 second of human brain. Guess how long it took?
I have an article here on that. The bit capacity of the human brain, 86 billion neurons,
I guess I don't
exceeds the byte capacity of the entire universe at 10 to the 120 bits, upon which a maximum of 10 to the 90 bits could have been operated on the last 40 billion years.
I hadn't finished something a little bit. All right.
What did they manage to? So what you were saying they were getting to 1 second?
They simulated 1 second of human power. It took them 40 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I can only imagine what the energy requirement was for that too.
Well, I got an article. You can Google it. It was last August or 2 August. Well, August 2019. They talk about all the specs. Yeah.
Yeah, I always find it interesting how, and obviously, and so much of the research is being done in the context of DNA computers and such. Obviously one of the single biggest value propositions is the paradigm shift in energy demand. I mean, I think the average person. I mean, I know I do. We take for granted the sheer amount of energy that's going into the server farm. That's XYZ spot. Like when you just think about the sheer amount of energy that's required for that computational power, and that one server farm is not even equivalent to one human brain, right? It's like, wow, that's
you
it's
can
amazing.
Google it, and they've got pictures of their K supercomputer farm. It's a large facility. I'm sure it takes several gigawatts of electricity.
Yeah.
And so
I say something I'm very interested to see is as of 2 years ago, I think this is the most recent one that I'd seen. The current estimate is that a human brain can store about 2.5 petabytes of data, and I wouldn't be surprised. And that was like 10x greater than the last estimate they've done. So I'm guessing it's going to continue to go up, that number. But even if it's 2.5 petabytes, when you really contemplate, like, okay, cool, so 1,000 people has the ability to store the equivalent of every byte of data on the planet.
Yeah, I wouldn't even know how to begin to translate how neurons hold information compared to a binary system. But yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like they're calculating that based on a very linear, limited. I say linear, not the right term, but let's just say a superficial understanding.
Yeah,
I think it's the same thing with like the argument. I crack up when I hear the argument about the human genome is only 800 megabytes, and I'm like, yeah, but that was calculated based on this central dogma. And okay, so if this one gene sequence can equal 10,000 different variable outcomes, I think you need to calculate. You got to calculate that into how big this data set is here, folks. And
right.
And that's before you even obviously factor in the dual use and the variations of reading frame and such. Oh wait, I can read it backwards and has a different outcome. What?
Right. Yeah, I've tried to kind of summarize or formulate a good way to describe DNA, the technology, and part of that is that it's bidirectional. DNA is read in both directions.
Yeah, I had I brought that up. I forget who it was. Somebody I had a debate with, and they didn't seem to grasp that premise of like, do you not comprehend that? Let's say you wrote a function And then if it's read the opposite direction, it's completely different, like a completely different function. Like that doesn't, number one, who's smart enough to do that? Right. And then
intelligence, right?
That's, I mean, I'm sure it's doable. Don't get me wrong. I mean, somebody can do it, but that's not like a, oh, I'm just going to do this on the fly kind of thing. Right. Some serious thought would have to go into the way you structure that. And then
we can do it with maybe one sentence.
Right. Right. It'd be tough. But I mean, you think about getting into like, oh yeah, hey, it's 500 lines of code. And it has to be able to be the exact, no modifications allowed. It must be able to go forward and backwards. Go. Like, good luck, bro. Oh, hey, and by the way, you can also have a couple of different breakpoints in that, and you can rearrange a paragraph and then have the exact same outcome or follow the exact same process either way and have a different outcome. I mean, that stuff it's amazing. It's
mind blowing. Yeah. And you're right. You have to have some sort of modicum of understanding of basic technology, much less modern technology, to even begin to really understand this stuff. So, and I think that's where the crux of the debates are, between those who have experience in modern technology and science versus those who are literally just trying to preach dogma.
Yeah, earlier I was watching the video on the plant hopper gears in their legs, and I don't know if you've ever seen the videos of that stuff.
Mm-mm.
That is mind bending. So this little bug is called a plant hopper, and it has literal, not figurative, it has literal gears that can control both of its legs, like the spring mechanism. So there's a signal sent to a central location, and the gears fire simultaneously and enable this little guy to jump a ridiculous distance. Let me see if I can find it.
I have it. Just a moment. I'm putting it here.
Me of the bacterial flagellum gears model thing too.
Gears are always thought of as a man-made invention used in our bikes and our cars. But what we've shown is that a small plant-sucking bug evolved gears long, long ago, and uses these gears to mechanically synchronize the very rapid jumping movements of its legs. This is the first demonstration of interacting gears being used by any animal. The jump is really very rapid indeed. It takes off at a velocity of about 5 meters per second. That's equivalent to about 12 miles per hour. And it accelerates in less than a millisecond. So it experiences enormous G-forces as it takes off.
Yeah, listen to this right here.
About 500 or even 700 G. I first became aware of these bugs when I was in the garden of my friend and colleague Peter Braunig in Aachen in Germany. He has a quite wild garden with lots of ivy growing all over the place. They're a very specific sort of bug. They only like to eat ivy. And so I spent a huge amount of time trying to look on all the ivy bushes in Cambridge for these bugs and couldn't find them. Then my 5-year-old grandson, Max, came to the rescue. He found these bugs in his garden, and he rushed up to me one day and said, "Granddad, I found these plant hoppers in my garden. Here they are." And so we brought them back to the lab here in Cambridge, and that's when I did the experiment of showing that the cogwheels were actually engaging with each other. The high-speed images that we have to take of these bugs to reveal these very brief events takes us into a completely different world. Two artists in London,
all right, now he gets off into the whole
like Hobbs, have collaborated with me on taking these films and doing a community project in Hackney in East London. So we've been interacting with a class of 9-year-old children from Gayhurst Primary School in Hackney, and with two groups of senior citizens called Ray's Geezers and the Sharp End. And that interaction has led to animating films.
Yeah, the rest of it's just about their like social
in the water.
Okay.
Social event. But yeah, to me, when you think about that, like he says, oh, it's about 500 Gs. I mean, think about that. Humans, I mean, the average human, you're going to pass out at what, like 5 or 6? And then if you have the appropriate conditioning, you might make it up to 9 or 10.
Yeah. Well, 8 or 9 is considered where you pass out, and 10 is where you start to get damage. Yeah.
Well, I'm saying like the average person is going to start gray. They're at least going to start graying out at extended 5 or 6.
Right.
And yeah, I agree with you 100%. Like, if you get beyond that, you're getting into crazy land. I mean, you think about that, like 500 Gs in a millisecond. I mean, what kind of I don't think a human could possibly survive that.
No.
I mean,
No, we can't.
It's like internal liquidation of our organs,
Right.
And the little bug, 500 Gs.
Right.
To me, that's just amazing. And before you even think about just the fact that you can do that's amazing. And then when you actually look at the mechanism that does it, I mean, I can't imagine anyone making the argument in any other context that, I mean, if we let's say we built a robot with the exact same logic, nobody would ever think the robot could come into existence without the intelligent agent, ever.
Right.
It's evolution,
Random.
random evolution. That's the great thing.
Yeah, one of the things I've decided I'm gonna work on here, Tangela, you might find this interesting, is I'm coming up with a series I'm gonna do on basically equating the atheist / evolutionist positions to being at the poker table and recognizing that your opponent is bluffing, and it's they're all in at this point, and it's I call, show me. I call you. You're full of it. I call. At this point, I think I'm gonna do like a series. But I'm gonna start it off kind of like and be like, okay, so on the flop, I've got Ace King of Hearts. There's 2 hearts on the flop. And I've got a straight draw, nut flush redraw, and you atheist, make these initiate these supposed debunkings of my argument. There's your bet, and I'm like, I kind of consider, I contemplate, I look at the evidence, and say, yeah, I call, and then the turn comes, and I hit the straight. I don't have the flush yet, so I've got the nut straight, and I have a nut flush redraw. And then you bet again. And I say, I'm all in. Your I raise. And then you're like, I'm all in. And I say, I call. And, river is going to, the river hasn't come yet, but I know the river is going to be a heart. And you're going to ship it because at this point, you ain't got a chance. And at this point, they have no outs. There's nothing in the deck that can help them at this point.
Well, that's why I usually point out to them as simply it's a faith-based statement. To say that natural selection did it or random chance, I'm like, well, show me an example. Show us the evidence that natural selection did something, and they can't.
In 2004, when Douglas X was making experiments and came up with that paper of the sequence space of a protein, and then number was 1 to 10 to the 74th that you would find in a random sequence space one which is functional. And then he thought, well, I'm proving that natural mechanisms are too unlikely to produce a protein and find a sequence which is functional. And he thought that would be basically a checkmate for atheism and materialism. And when then the science paper was published, then the reaction wasn't absolutely what he expected, and the dialogue goes on still today, up to today. So nothing has changed. I mean, you can provide whatever evidence you want to a materialist and an atheist, but when he is blinded by literally the religion, which is atheism, then nothing can convince him. And he will always say, "Oh, you don't have enough evidence."
Well, and the other irony for that is that, to my knowledge, to date, nobody has formally debunked or really even challenged his math. I mean, there's been posturing, but nobody's, to my knowledge, I could be wrong on this, but I don't think anybody's actually presented a formal counter to his position.
Well, so back, I used to be an atheist when I was in high school, and so I understand their position that no matter of improbability matters to them. It's literally a leap of faith. It could be even 3 times as much of a lack of probability of what his equation is. They still have the faith to believe it still happened.
I make when I called in at the Jimmy Snow's the Line Show, I showed to him that the minimal bacteria which is free living and synthesizes all the 20 amino acids, the chance to have such a bacteria with 1.3 million nucleotides is 1 to the 10 to the 700,000 of power. And when I finished, he gave me 30 seconds. Then he said, "Oh, that's an argument from incredulity." Now, hey, think about that. Should I believe that that kind of odds is even remotely possible or plausible?
But the argument from incredulity has nothing to do with a probability equation. That's a fallacy where someone says that something can't be true because they don't understand it.
Well, what he wanted to say is that I should believe that kind of odds is plausible.
Well, here's the other thing,
Right.
though. Here's the other thing I think, though, in terms of a lot of the people that we deal with on a regular basis, is I don't think. Again, I'm not applying this to all of them, but I think a good significant percentage of them, I don't think they actually comprehend half of the arguments that we're making. And
They don't need to. It's just faith.
Well, but John, I made the same argument with Dimitar last week, and when I said, he asked me, "What is your hypothesis? What is your proposal?" And I said, "My proposal is that the cell is irreducibly complex." And then he answered and said, "Well, nobody in science makes that hypothesis, makes that claim. We believe that everything evolved by chemical evolution." And he brings in Darwinian evolution in abiogenesis.
well, that's the point. That's the point I was making earlier. I mean, they admit that. And that's why I get so irritated when people try to, in the debates, they try to act like there's a separation point between biological evolution and abiogenesis. I'm like, no. Per the Origin of Life researchers, they are searching for a open Darwinian evolutionary synthesis that was self-replication. That's it. Like, that's their objective. So, and that is pre-cell,
Yes,
pre-cell. So they're applying natural selection and Darwin and evolution before there's a cell. So
Yes,
you cannot
that's correct.
you can't make this line of say there's it's just separate. No, they are directly connected. There is no separation. And the piece that gets me, and this goes back to some of the either the blindness on one side or the conscious ignorance on the other, which is, what the heck do you think they're arguing evolution is in biological systems? It's chemical evolution. That's what they're arguing. So if
Sure.
Origin of Life is chemical evolution, and ultimately changes to alleles is chemical mutation, chemical evolution through mutation. I'm not really understanding how you're trying to separate this. Like, it's all from their perspective. It's all chemical modifications. Period.
It's called begging the question fallacy, John, where your premise is the same as the conclusion.
True.
Yeah, Dimitar made exactly that point, John. Last week he said that we have replication first prebiotically in the protocell, and their Darwinian evolution kicks in.
You guys know that Darwin was never a scientist, right?
Excuse me?
Darwin was never a scientist, and everything he ever published was pure plagiarism. Do you know that? I'm not kidding.
It was philosophy. It was
Not even that.
yeah.
So Darwin was a Christian when he was raised in a very Christian home. His grandfather was one of the key members. Actually helped Prime Minister or MP Wilberforce help actually start the abolitionist movement, the global abolitionist movement. They were Christians, and he tried to become a doctor first. He went to medical school, but flunked his first semester because he was so basically inept at science. Darwin could not comprehend science, and so he literally failed and was kicked out of medical school. His father was furious and basically told him, "Look, I'm not going to pay for you to go anywhere else except for Christ College to become a minister," because that's what he thought that Darwin could. That's the only thing he could do. And so he did. And so everything Darwin ever wrote or ever believed or whatever came from his studies to become a Christian minister while at Christ College. As a matter of fact, in his own works, his own books, he talks about how his favorite book was the book titled Natural Theology from William Paley, who was also one of his alma maters there at Christ College. And I go into the history of their relationship together. In fact, Christ College today still keeps Paley's and Darwin's portraits facing each other in their cafeteria as if Paley's still teaching Darwin. But so everything Darwin ever learned or ever even talked about came from what he studied from Paley and from Lamarck and other actual creationists, naturalists that were basically starting the real science of what people today want to pretend is evolution. And so Darwin was a Christian copying from these people. And he had, it was all plagiarism until later in life. And he couldn't get published because it was the same thing that all the other creationists were all publishing until his daughter Annie died. He had several children. His oldest daughter was his love of his life. And she got sick and he would pray and pray and pray, asking for God to heal her. And he didn't. And so when she died, it caused him to lose his faith. He fell away from Christ, had a real bad, falling away, really depressed, etc. And not only did he lose his faith, but he went even further into anti-science, basically. And it's where he started hooking up with people like Thomas Huxley and a few others who were atheist white supremacists to the strictest level of the word. They were the ones that were saying, oh, yeah, well, gorillas are just evolved, or black people are just evolved gorillas. They have inferior brains. White man is the epitome, whatever. And that's where Darwin started to add Huxley's atheist white supremacy dogma onto actual creationism, the actual creationist science that he stole from his studies at Christ College. And that's what evolution is today. But I go into more details, and I've got Darwin's direct quotes and examples. And yeah, he was never.
And the whole framework, the philosophical framework of methodological naturalism started with Thomas Huxley and the X Club in the 19th centuries. In that period from 1860 to 1880, more or less, that they brought that in, and since then, today science is based on methodological naturalism. And I mean, for operational science, it's okay only to seek for natural explanations. But when it comes to historical science, then you need to permit the evidence to lead wherever it is, and that should include design, but they exclude it a priori.
Well, the thing that gets me is, you and I have talked about this before, Tangelo, the level of the most fundamental, the discoveries that are the most fundamental to the underpinnings of the universe have all been discovered by people who were looking for structure and believed that they're in a creator. Even if it was just deistic, they still believed that there was a creator, and therefore they should be looking for structure and logic.
It sounds like what C.S. Lewis said.
And well, it's well documented at this point. And to me, when you really fast forward to now, it's something I find very fascinating is since the 1950s on, the real explosion of, modern synthesis and just Darwinian evolutionary concepts applying to so many different disciplines, basically every discipline at this point in academia. We haven't really had too many underlying fundamental discoveries. We figured out a boatload of applications of previous discoveries. And we found different, we discovered the Higgs boson and, different stuff like that, different little pieces, but those were already predicted, right? We just found these different things. We haven't really had any, or I'm sure we have, very few, truly fundamental discoveries of the underlying roots of existence. And I really wonder how much of that stems directly from the fact that consciously or subconsciously people are I'm talking a lot of people doing research, are literally trying to avoid finding order.
Well, quantum physics goes into that. Planck with his the mind is the matrix of all matter type philosophy, or not philosophy, but science.
Well, no, I'm saying, but Planck was Planck is prior to the time that I'm talking about.
Okay.
I agree with you. Like that's what I'm saying. Leading up to really I'd say
It's Planck.
Okay,
Planck.
I thought it was pronounced Planck.
Oh.
I mean, all that thing of applying the scientific method and to make predictions. Hey, tell me, has science predicted that we would find that kind of complexity that we see now in the molecular world?
No, that's my point. Like we found a lot of things almost in spite of ourselves. Like the evidence is being.
Nobody would have ever imagined to find the kind of things that we see in molecular biology. That was not predicted by
no, I
means.
agree with you 100%. That's my point. Like when you were making the point earlier about like the in papers, amazingly, astoundingly, surprisingly, all these different words are in their papers of just how how much their minds are being blown of different things that they're discovering. And it cracks me up when they literally say the words, "We did not expect this." Well, contrary to our prediction, or whatever the language is. It's like, so you guys were going into this expecting it to be simple and have no like fundamental mind-bending complexity, and you're finding this in spite of yourself. Imagine what they could be finding if they were going and looking for it and expecting it to be there. Is the point I'm making.
And I would argue that that's always been going on, though. I would say, John. For example, even in the 1800s, when Darwin, he couldn't get published. He was very unpopular, and the whole history of all that was a big mess. Darwin, he never did anything. He never had an original thought. It was Gregor Mendel, who was a Catholic priest in some it's a area that's in Czechoslovakia today, some monastery, Catholic monastery. He was experimenting with plants, hybrids and pea plants, things like that. He's the one that figured out genetics. He is the founder of modern genetics today. This guy Gregor Mendel. He came up with the recessive and dominant gene structure, and he didn't call it genes back then. But everything that we rely on, all the nomenclatures for genetics today, come from that one man who wasn't trying to prove anything. He was just trying to understand how God did plants. And that's where the quote unquote science of evolution comes from, is from this Catholic guy, and again, he was in obscurity. Nobody really cared, and Darwin, even other atheists. I'll have to point out this one guy named Batesman. He was an atheist biologist, again, at the late 1800s, early 1900s. Most atheists back then hated Darwin, because not only was Darwin just literally plagiarizing from creationists, their science that he himself had learned from, but none of this stuff was even plausible. Darwin at the time was talking about the germules. I don't know if you know about his pangenesis theory. All these things were just stupid. The things that Darwin published, the biologists, the naturalists of his day knew that they were all wrong, and he was just a laughingstock. So even other atheists like Batesman, Batesman's the guy who discovered Gregor Mendel. He was looking at Mendel's research that was just out there, somewhere lost. And he's like, wow.
Mendel's original stuff was in like some obscure German journal somewhere like that. Nobody knew about for years.
He was that Mendel guy. And so, so the point is that the only science that's ever done, much less in genetics or even the supposed thing of evolution, all of this science is only done by those who were trying to understand how God does things. That's it. They were expecting to see these fantastic, or even call it these rules that God created, and that's who discovers these things. The atheists never do.
Well, I agree with you. And what I find interesting is I find it very fascinating how in modern times they try to like frame like Newton, for example, as he was just faking.
No, God.
Being a Christian. And I'm like, are you kidding me? The man literally spent as much time, if not more, of his life trying to like determine the codes in the Bible than he did figuring out gravity and classical mechanics.
Real
And
quick on that, here's my favorite quote from Isaac Newton. He said, quote, "I have a fundamental belief in the Bible as the word of God, written by those who were inspired. I study the Bible daily," quote unquote. I love it.
yeah, I mean, the man was. We obviously underestimate
Yes.
the level of intellect that man had. I think it's completely
Yes.
underpinned now, or sorry, underrepresented now, of just like the sheer genius. Like, hey, folks, he literally went out and like constructed calculus in order to figure out to solve a problem. Like,
Yeah. You understand the orbits of the planets.
Yeah,
Did
yeah.
you seen what was that guy's name? Tyson?
Oh, you're talking about Neil deGrasse Tyson?
Yeah. Have you seen his little interview or his little thing about Isaac Newton? That's my favorite.
I don't think I have.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I'll show you. I'll link it or something. But go ahead. That is my best description of Isaac Newton, is from what he said. He literally calls him the greatest physicist who ever lived. I love it.
Yeah, but I think people really underestimate that whole all stuff he did. I mean, Principia and
Yeah, I've seen.
that's a mind bender when you think about like, and he wrote that in what, like 16, whatever it was. I mean, one of the things too that I think modern humans forget about is that some of these things, like a Newton, like a Da Vinci, they figured all this stuff out literally on paper. They had no computers. They had none of this technology that we take for granted. They didn't have microscopes. They didn't have all these different, things that we just completely take for granted. And yet they were being able to deduce and.
Well, it was actually Newton who invented the mirror telescope.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And all the other lens technology, right? He's the founder of optics.
Yep.
Yeah.
What was his book? What was his book on? That has that name. Brain freeze. But yeah, it's just amazing what we take for granted, and to the point of being fundamentally not just, oh, they were influential in. No.
Yeah.
They were the cause of our understanding. Yeah, the root cause of our discovery into these different disciplines.
Right. They're world changers.
It always annoyed me how people said that Darwin was so intelligent, that the theory of evolution is so eloquent and beautiful, and some of those ID proponents talk like that, and I'm just saying, you got to be kidding,
Yeah.
But now when I heard what you said about him, is even more so.
Yeah, no.
Like,
you just read his own work, and people will be like, "Wow, this guy's retarded." Be nice. Put it nicely. Mentally challenged.
Yeah.
Yeah. Darwin was a total fraud.
It's like,
I don't say
to me, evolution is far from eloquent and beautiful. It's like, it doesn't even have a mechanism, and the mechanism it's supposed to have isn't able to produce anything it's purported to produce.
That's right. Yeah, and all of the would-be theories of it today are all based only exclusively on other creationists that actually are discovering the science. Darwin's original hypothesis for genetic information transfer, which again they didn't call it genes back then, was what he called pangenesis, which was literally it's based off of how sponge sea creatures procreate. Essentially, he thought that genetic, or not gene information, but heredity information, they called it back then, was the same in all cells of an entire organism, and all the cells basically spermiated together, and so that's how they transferred new and variety of information. Evolution, quote unquote, basically transferred through all cells, and he completely ignored the science of the day, even that knew about the sperm and the egg and things like that, and actual sexual reproduction. He ignored all of that to only pretend that all cells spread their genetic information together, and it was just a total laughingstock.
Yeah, there is no explanation still today how sex evolved. No, that's called the queen of problems of evolutionary biology. Sex.
I'll tell you one of the
Nobody
things.
knows.
One of the things I find the most fascinating about sexual reproduction is the fact that we cannot and have failed miserably, and it actually seems to have, like, starting to figure out the reasons why to an extent, but we theoretically, if you can do a recombination, you should be able to take male, male, female, female, theoretically, and have recombination happen. It does not.
Not without sterilizations for sure.
And one of the things they're discovering is that there are epigenetic tags in certain portions of each genome from the sperm and egg that literally designate female and male. And without those tags, it doesn't recombine properly. And
Right. That's the whole. Oh, sorry.
anyway, where I'm going with all that is what I think is very interesting is that not only does that prevent reproduction without it being, male, female, it also happens in very specific sections of the genome, like where these tags are specifically. Right. But then once the recombination happens, then there's active removal of almost every single, other than some of the stuff from the mother, basically all of the epigenetic tags are completely removed. And it's like a complete hard reboot of the system for new data. Like for new data set. This is a brand new start from scratch. Other than a few minor modifications, we're gonna erase all the markers from the previous, from the mother, father, and now this is unique. And to me, when you think about that, like, that's just mind blowing. But then secondarily, you think like, wait a minute, no, seriously, evolution. So seriously, explain that to me. How does that happen?
Yeah, that's. I was going to say that's the premise behind what they call the intersex movement now, so to say, or the phenomenon, where there are mistakes. Where the XY chromosomes sections within human zygotes they do break, and they do cause errors essentially. So that's where you get like the triple XY type genome and stuff like that. And so a lot of people are trying to say, well, this is proof, that these hermaphrodites and stuff, a true hermaphrodite, this is evolution. I'm like, no, this is a mistake. Not only is it an error, but the genome is pre-programmed to try to. That's where the diseases and all the problems that hermaphrodites have in life. They're not just dual sexes and just have a fun, happy, go lucky life of being one or both genders trapped in whatever. They have massive problems, and it's because the genome is trying to correct that mistake. So yeah. So
I'll tell you something else I read about it recently was with the quality control in female egg production. Mm-hmm. So this actually blew my mind. So how like we hear, when a woman's born, like she has all of her eggs she's ever going to have, all that kind of stuff, right? What we don't get told is that within in the first trimester, that female baby in the womb has literally millions of eggs. And then throughout the course of development in the womb, that number gets reduced, like errors. Basically, all the ones that have errors are just being nuked left and right. And so by the time the baby is born, it's gone from millions to a couple thousand. And like been removing all the errors left and right. I'm like, when you think about that from a error correction, like think about them, Angela, from a factory standpoint. Can you imagine if you had, 60 million products go through and you got rid of all of the ones that had errors down to and only kept this extremely minor set left to like the absolute best? And like, to me, when you really think about that, like that contradicts evolutionary theory, right? Like if the whole purpose is to have the greatest chance of reproduction,
right?
Why wouldn't you have millions? Why would you not keep them? Like that just gives you more opportunity to reproduce versus having quality control mechanisms built in. Like how do you get to having the quality control mechanisms is my point.
Dimitri would say that life chooses the better survivability rate, which is ridiculous. I love that meme, by the way, on Tangela.
Yeah, that is, if you study protamines, which are the compaction of the chromosomes in the sperm, it is like a bullet. It is totally encapsulated in that part, in that first part here. That's fantastic high technology, and the compaction is even far more than normal. It is at the physically possible level. The chromosomes are compacted and then literally encapsulated in order when the transmission occurs that the chromosomes cannot be harmed somehow. And the complexity to get this is amazing. It is amazing. When you start to study that, then you see all that kind of stuff here is required. All what you see here listed is required to get that compaction and the physical form required to have the transition and no destruction of the chromosomes during the transition.
And the fact that it can unzip, for lack of a better word, once it penetrates the egg, in order to, like to your point, like it's hyper compacted to get there, and then can do an amazing uncompaction process to be able to actually fertilize the egg. It's amazing.
Well, they have to combine as well in a specific order to be able to become a viable organism.
Here the modifications on the histones to get that is just all these kind of proteins are required to get the transformation. I mean, when you start to study the sperm, it's mind-blowing.
Chris, I wouldn't. I love that all ideas are, yeah. Chris Keith says that he'll bring the IQ down in the room. I strongly would disagree with that.
Yeah, Chris, you always have good points. Yeah, it really is interesting when you, to me anyway, when you really contemplate the conscious and willful suspension of logical conclusion that has to be being undertaken in order to avoid the obvious.
Yeah.
And all this stuff. It's like, okay, if you only looked at one component, then okay, maybe you might be able to explain it. But when you have hundreds of thousands of different variables, like the ones we're talking about tonight, that just blow the mind, and then you continue to argue adamantly that we're the ones that are living in a God of the gaps mindset, worldview, like, I don't understand how you come to that conclusion. I really don't. Other than the point we've been making, obviously, about the religion aspect, but
yeah, like I was telling on Tangelo earlier tonight that I've done professional projects where I thought I was enjoying understanding some of these really complex systems to try to reverse engineer into our own technology and human technology. And the more I learn and the stuff that you guys share and Tangelo shows in his blog, even people like me that do this stuff professionally, it's not even scratching the surface is even an understatement.
Now, John, let me ask you something. Last week, Speed was attacking you because of your debate with the Godless Engineer, where you said that there was no physical interaction during the translation, and then I went to his stream and I said, well, what I understand, Mike, is what John meant by that is that there is no direct chemical interaction between the anticodon and the amino acid binding site on the tRNA, and
Correct.
There is physical distance, so there is no chemical reaction.
Well, not only is that correct, in the debate, I actually made that clear distinction.
Yes, and he was
it went over his head. He didn't get it.
Yes, and he was ridiculing you in regards of that. And then I went to his stream and tried to explain it to him. And then his last resort was to say, oh, but it's all chemical reactions. Of course, if you look at it in a global way, of course, we are talking about chemistry. But if you are talking about the point that you are making in special, then you are correct.
Yeah. Well, in at the end of the day, the ultimate point that I was making, and which gets me, and Joel, you'll appreciate this. So the guy that we're referring to, you know who Godless Engineer is?
I do not.
Okay. Well, he's an idiot. But anyway, this guy has a bachelor's degree in computer engineering and a master's degree in software engineering, and he currently is employed
Wow.
as a dev by the United States Army.
Wow. Incredible. How this guy didn't understand absolutely nothing that you said, John. He made just he demonstrated a total lack of understanding of absolutely anything that you said to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was good.
So the point that I was making to him was, okay, we're talking about arbitrary data value assignment, like for code mapping, right? And I'm like, the codon does not chemically become the amino acid. There is no chemical interaction between the codon and the amino acid. Right. Therefore, you have to have a intermediary interpreting translation mechanism, which is obviously, as we all know, the ribosome. Like,
right.
Therefore, you have to account for how the data value was assigned.
That's the crux of the
freaking codon. Like, there's like no way around this.
Yeah.
And
not only is each individual codon have as a key function, but all genomes, all sequences in all genomes share the same exact 3 start-stop codon command keys as well.
Yes,
that is the exact opposite of randomness.
And if you don't have that, how do you know when to stop the translation and when to start to begin with? You cannot have life just because of these 3 start and stop codons.
Well, and then I've heard the argument, I've debated this for a long time myself. I've heard the argument, well, RNA disproves that because RNA shares a couple of different start-stop codon commands, but DNA does not. So in RNA, again, that's just a small snippet, a packet of DNA. So the fact that the chemical can be temporarily reassigned, but only reassigned by the DNA, which cannot be reassigned without failure, is proof that this is all pre-codified. This is all organized, unnatural technology.
And the fact that we can reprogram the interpretation of, and we actually, beyond that, we can create our own syntax.
Just that we can, or that it can be synthesized at all, right?
Well, it can be synthesized, but I'm saying the fact that we can reprogram the ribosome, for example, to read the syntax in a different way. Like we create our own syntax, right? So we've been able to reprogram and reassign the interpretation. Like, if that is possible to be done, then obviously there literally is a meaning. If we can consciously reassign the meaning, then obviously there is a pre-existing meaning. Right?
But the most incredible thing is that if you actually read professional scientists in regards of the issue, like Eugene Konin, he admits that there is no explanation and that it's one of the biggest enigmas and mysteries in science how the genetic code emerged. He admits it, that there is a paper out there. Now, Speed and these guys, they think that's not a problem and that natural explanations are fine to explain the issue in question.
Yeah, like
so
Super on.
They know more than professional scientists, which admit that science is in the dark to explain the evolution of the genetic code. But these guys think, naturalism explains it.
Yes, that's a faith statement. They have faith that something did it.
Now, I've listened carefully last week in regards of Dimitar and his explanation and his peptide hypothesis. And he starts with, it seems that there are some affinities between some peptides and RNA. And then he made the case that that was the starting point of some very simple peptide structures, which then somehow formed together and then during a long trajectory became a ribosome.
Yeah, that's stupid. I touched on it earlier. It's like plastic becoming,
And then I did send to everyone. I think you guys received. I think you, John, received it too. I gave an explanation and an answer to that, and then I said, "Hey, you need the tRNAs, the amino acid tRNA synthetase. You need the ribosome. You need the messenger RNA. You need the genetic code. You need all that stuff together. If one is missing, then you have no translation. How do you explain that this emerged? And on top of that, you need all the machinery to make the ribosome, all the proteins, the scaffold proteins, the chaperones, the cofactors, to make the ribosome, to make the tRNAs, which is also extremely complex. And you think this all emerged by a gradual, stepwise process on prebiotic Earth?
Right. That's why I tried to make a comparison to something like a rocket engine. You know, rocket engines, they have different types of materials, different strength, different tensiles. They got turbo shafts that have to deal with literally tens of thousands of psi of pressure and heat, and all kinds of very, you know, difficult to manufacture, much less regulate, you know, to make a rocket engine do what a rocket engine does. And to literally assume you can make that out of nothing but Legos and still expect it to get into space. That is the equivalent of what we're talking about.
Wow. Yeah, that's a very good illustration, Joel.
I'm probably, we can come up with lots of other ones, but that, in my mind, that's what they're talking about. And not just Legos, not just plastic, which is what peptides are, but one, you know, Legos come in a beautiful variety. You can make all kinds of fun things out of Legos, but just one type of Lego with one shape, instead of still make a rocket engine out of it. It just doesn't work. It would just melt. You couldn't even start it. It would it's a fantasy. It's literally a fairy tale evolution.
So this was this is part of my opening statement against the godless engineer idiot. By the way, somehow this guy has like 50,000 subscribers. It blows the mind. But he decided to attack me. So I started my channel back in beginning of February. And March 4th, I had like 12 subscribers. And this jackass decided to come and like debunk me and just completely annihilate me, right? And his argument was so dumb. He literally, and you'll see this in a second, he literally made the argument that there was nothing, no DNA was no different than Diet Coke and regular Coke. And I was just like, you got to be kidding me. So anyway, it turned into an ongoing back and forth, which ultimately culminated in our debate, which was entertaining.
Materialism and its foundation of Darwinian evolution is nothing but a cloud of smoke which is decimated by the wind of rational thought and logical analysis. We are told that evolution is a settled and proven science. Its very foundation is based upon the assumption that information can come from nothing. If this is so, why then does all modern science prove beyond doubt that life cannot reproduce without the genetic code housed in our DNA? In any other context, a person would be considered insane to insist that a language of any kind, spoken or written, could form without consciousness and intellect being required. I ask you, would any rational person argue the numerous languages used for the software and design of hardware required for this debate? Could they possibly somehow spring into existence by chance? Without intelligence and logic, can any of these concepts be devised? I would say no, but I shall let the words of my opponent address this question. I leave the determination of his rationality to you, the audience.
This brings me to what my next video will explain in much more detail, and that is the genetic code, and more importantly, the information it contains. Atheists desperately attempt to avoid the premise that it actually contains real information and is not just purely deterministic chemical reactions.
I mean, it is just chemical reactions. Like I said at the beginning of this, DNA can be interpreted as a code, but that does not make it inherently a code. We can determine certain sequences, and we can know the effect of those sequences on the rest of the organism, or on certain biomechanical operations or chemical interactions within an organism. Like, we can determine those things. Just because we can determine sequences in DNA does not mean that it inherently contains code, though.
DNA it's an identical process to computer codes. And it's very interesting that, you know, computer ideas about computers developed early in the 20th century. And, you know, Claude Shannon comes along in 1948.
But it is not a code. It's a chemical. It's deoxyribonucleic acid. It's an acid. I don't understand why you think it's a code. DNA is no more of a code than Diet Coke and regular Coke.
There needs to be no question that communication theory applies to biology. Okay, all of these concepts can be applied to DNA.
Is that debated anywhere?
Only among people who are ignorant, frankly. Okay. People in the know do not
But
debate
not in
this
this
fact.
credible scientific
No.
community. This is well
No.
understood.
There is no credible scientific argument to try to say that applying communication theory to biology is somehow inappropriate. There's hundreds of scientific papers that go very deep into the subject. And so, no, there's...
And again, the only people that have ever mentioned this or ever said this or ever expect this are creationists, just like you.
I'm talking at the moment with Perry Marshall and Kevin Ham. Perry Marshall is from Chicago in the United States, and Kevin Ham is from Vancouver in Canada. And we have just taken part in the United Kingdom launch of a huge prize to be won by anybody who can produce the genetic code or a genetic code via natural process generating it itself. Perry, have I got that right, first of all?
That's right. Any code, any encoding, message decoding system that can come out of an emergent property from chemicals to code would qualify.
Yes.
And I think it's one of the most fundamental questions in all of science. And it just hasn't gotten the attention that it deserves.
No, that's right. It hasn't. And I think that's partly why we've been highlighting it in the meeting that we've just had here at the Royal Society in London. You can't get much more prestigious than that, can you?
No, it's
by the way.
It's
Yes.
delightful.
Yes. Now, question perhaps also to Kevin, does it really need to be 10 million? You know, I'm a scientist. To me, that's a huge sum of money.
But it is not a code. It's a chemical. It's deoxyribonucleic acid. It's an acid. I don't understand why you think it's a code. DNA is no more of a code than Diet Coke and regular Coke.
Damn, dude, there's 10 million on the line for this one. I guess you just need to fly over to Oxford, go meet up with the Royal Society and tell them how they've been completely duped on this entire premise of the genetic code actually being a real code, and that they don't need to be remotely associated with it because it could completely decimate their credibility as academics.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was part of my opening statement against him in my debate with him. Let's just say that he continued to double down and double down and double down.
No, but what was even more amazing that then on his own channel he did put section of that debate as if he had won that debate with you. I mean, hey, he was destroyed by you, John, and didn't even realize that.
Well, the thing that I find interesting. Go ahead, man.
Indoctrination is a powerful thing. Go ahead.
Well, I agree with the indoctrination, but like, if you're a dev, I don't think you can remotely, without consciously ignoring the obvious and refusing to even contemplate the logic. If you're a dev,
I agree.
There's no way you can avoid this conclusion. I mean, that at least it's there. Now, you might be able to try and come up with an explanation for how it could exist, but I don't know how you can deny that it does exist. Like, it would be like a doctor, a surgeon being like, yeah, I don't use a scalpel for surgery. I mean, like, what? It's I don't know.
It's just a chemical, John. It's just a chemical. DNA is just a chemical. Yes, of course. It's a chemical like a hard disk is just made of metal and so forth, but it hosts instructions, it hosts codes, it hosts information. And that's the same with DNA.
Yeah, well, just like modern computers, it's just a collection of chemicals of mostly germanium and silicon, But hey, those random chemicals in the computer, it does what you want, just automatic by magic.
One of my favorite arguments or like examples, my thought experiments to do is like, okay, so you found a DNA sequence in a rock, in a safe, and per your own dating mechanisms, it's 4 billion years old. You crack the code, and then it has a schematic in the code for robots to build bigger things. Would you ever conclude that the original input of the data inside the strain of DNA that you found inside of a rock, inside of a safe, would you ever conclude that an intelligent agent had not been required in order to input that data?
Aliens did it.
Yeah.
And that, like, well, we didn't. The response I always get is, well, we wouldn't have observed who put it in there. Therefore, it could have some other explanation. Like,
evolution did it. Evolution is the solution.
I'd say one of the most fun debates I've read, or I say conversations I had, was with Call Me Emo.
Well,
And,
they're only repeating.
Dogma.
Jungle, did we lose you?
No? Jungle?
Must have lost signal.
Oh, is he the guy out on the lake?
Yeah. What was it? Potentially with I had this whole stream with Emo on my channel.
No, I
And
did.
I got him. We got to start talking about, like, I was like, okay, let's say we found self-replicating robots on Mars. Would you conclude that it was the logical, plausible, and probable, explanation that an intelligent agent, even if you didn't observe them initially creating the self-replicating robots on Mars, would you conclude that it was the reasonable deduction that an intelligent agent was required? And he danced around and basically said yes. And I'm like, okay then. So we find the freaking robots that self-replicate on Mars, and the logical conclusion is the intelligent agent. But the ridiculous amount of self-replicating biological robots that are on Earth, that's not the rational conclusion.
Hey, Jungle, yeah, I think you're having connectivity issues again.
Yeah, again. I just wanted to say that they're only repeating what they're being told.
Right.
And these atheists, that are so adamant about what they believe is only parroting what the lies that they've been told. And that's the thing that bothers me, is that they're being lied to.
Yes.
And then they're making themselves to be looking like fools, but it's because of the lies they're being told by these people who are supposedly educated.
But the most amazing thing is that they don't think that they are fools. They think that we are fools and they are the smart guys above us.
Guys, I generally think well, first of all, John, are you familiar with Stargate SG-1?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you think making me remember replicators.
Mm-hmm.
But, anyways, I think it's more insidious than that, gentlemen. I honestly think it's not that they're dumb. It's not that they're fooled or just lied to. I mean, they are, but that's not their motive. I think these types of people, they're generally, they need to believe. It's a requirement in their current position in life and their philosophy that human beings are animals. They need to dehumanize humanity. Right. Well, yeah.
That's
so
the consequence.
It's moralistic or immoralistic, really. It's a need to say that you're not special. You're just another monkey. So that's a political thing almost.
No, I would agree with you on that, and I think some of that stems directly from the absolute decimation of self-confidence and self-esteem that's happened over the last 50 years, but especially, I'd say, within the last 25. I mean, it's gotten to such a degree that the point you were just making about that desperate need to believe this and for it to be true, I think it's one of the components of their passion for it. I think stems from, otherwise they can't justify their mental state.
Right.
And
they can't be allowed to be wrong. Right.
Right. And to me, I don't understand why you would passionately argue that you're a monkey. Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, you are literally arguing that you are dumb. I don't understand why you would make this argument.
And I will address things like that. I've got these, I was in the military as well. I've been all over the planet, and I share stories. I try to explain this to people. The Chinese right now, they're the prominent atheist dominant nation state in the world today. Still, they're actively there's a British international tribunal that recently published their research, their conclusion that the Chinese are actively harvesting organs from what I call their political and religious dissident slaves. They're harvesting organs from these detainees, they call them, while they're still alive.
Yeah.
That's the reason. That's why they need to believe this thing. That's why they need to call you stupid, so they can justify doing things like that.
Yep. Well,
they are horrific. They have so many prison camps where they imprison people which do not agree with the politicians and the politics and so forth. And these are real concentration camps, and they drive the Chinese economy. It is a terror state, really. And we all need to thank God that we have not been born in China.
Yes. Well,
yeah, and people want to take over the United States and turn it into the same thing.
Right. It's an atheist political statement or state.
It's absolutely horrific. And they are being the Christians are being persecuted, and the Muslims and so forth, and any political dissident is being persecuted. Right. There is no freedom there. It's a George Orwell's state of total control. They are far more advanced in controlling their population than the United States and any other country.
Yes, and it's methodological. There's a reason for it. That's why evolution exists. It's not because of science. It's not because of a genuine pursuit to understand reality. It's only and specifically motivated to be able to do what atheists are doing, or evolutionists or have done. And I got all kinds of quotes for Russia, for Nazi Germany. Oh gosh, everywhere. The Jacobins and the French Revolution, you name it, it's always the same.
Well, and
humanize humanity.
And the genesis of the United States in the early 1900s. I mean, that's I'd say what's pretty interesting. In line with that, did you guys know that when the Third Reich? Well, I'm gonna get to Planned Parenthood, but when the Third Reich was creating their structure, like some of their laws and stuff, specifically their race laws. I forget the guy's name, but they had actually sent one of their guys over to the United States to directly interact with some of the different universities and some of the different eugenicists in America. And when he came back, they literally decided that they weren't going to go as far as some of the eugenics laws that were in place in like different different states in here in America during that period. And like, well, those that's a little bit too extreme. And I'm like, there's from the minutes of like one of their like discussions, like was they were creating the Third Reich, and I'm like, okay, so the Nazis thought some of this crap was too extreme.
Mm-hmm.
That's insane. But yeah, to your point on like Margaret Sanger, like her whole people downplay the fact that she was like a major leading player in the eugenics movement in the United States. And I mean, some of her public statements about the objective of extermination of Latinos, Blacks, and Jews. I mean, it's like she did not even equivocate in what the objective was. And it fascinates me. Fast forward to now, and how that institution is protected with such extreme by the quote unquote progressives.
I like to quote. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I like to quote her article that she published in the New York Times on April 8th, 1923, titled "Apostle of Birth Control Sees Cause Gaining Here," quote unquote. She says, quote, "Birth control is not contraception indiscriminately and thoughtlessly practiced. It means the release and cultivation of the better racial elements in our society, and the gradual suppression, elimination, and eventual extirpation of defective stocks, those human weeds which threaten the blooming of the finest flowers of American civilization. Margaret Sanger.
Yep.
Sounds like Nazis.
Well, and when you look at the physical location of like 90-something% of the Planned Parenthood, like physical buildings around the country, they are literally within blocks of the lowest income minority neighborhoods.
Yep, that was the target.
It was the objective. It's been executed, and to me, when you really think about when you look at the African American population, for example, I think in 1950, I want to say it was like 11%. Fast forward to now, you're at what, 13.5%? If that they didn't accomplish the objective of extermination, but that basically mitigated growth. And when you think about when you do a comparison to the Latino or the Hispanic population, it was about 9% at the same point, and now I think it's just under 17%. So when you think from the same time frame, it's like, wait a minute, how does that make any sense, right? I mean, I understand why in this context, but I mean, when you think about the paradigm shift that would have logically occurred if that, among other factors, but that being a major one, hadn't been implemented back in the 50s so aggressively. I mean, just the ultimate destruction of the family unit inside of the African American community, there would be such a different paradigm now. And it's honestly, it sickens me when I listen to the idiots. To say idiots, some of them are consciously doing this stuff, some are just brainwashed. But when I listen to the talking heads go make their passionate arguments in defense of things like Planned Parenthood, just like, you are literally defending people whose objective is extermination of a race.
Yes.
I think they just distanced themselves from Margaret Sanger, didn't they, just recently?
Well, they try to, but the irony is half the people that are running around being the advocates don't know anything about her. They're ignorant fools.
Yeah.
I've heard people say she didn't start Planned Parenthood, which is another just insanity. But yeah, all of that reminds me of, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Olivia, I can't pronounce her name, King, Martin Luther King's niece.
Yeah.
She's an advocate of all this. One of her quotes I love so much is, she says, the great irony is that abortion has done what the Klan only dreamed of. 1/4 of the black population is now missing. Talking about abortion.
Yep.
The evolution of
guys, it's almost 2 a.m. at my time. I will close the live broadcast, but you guys can continue here. Thank you, everyone that has assisted here, and see you